Chapter 151 Veteran. King Nuven lay quietly on the ground. He was still holding the shoulder of the great axe handle tightly, as if it was his lover. The spike between the two axe blades was deep inside his chest. Everyone in the Hall of Heroes stared helplessly at the scene. Shock, bewilderment, sadness, grief, countless emotions mingled with each other. Archduke Pofret, the winner of the duel, was drenched in sweat. His hand slowly slid down from the handle of the great axe. As his body relaxed, he fell to his knees beside King Nuven and panted heavily. Pofret's eyes were glassy, and his chest rose and fell. He looked as if he had just awoken from a nightmare. Having witnessed the battle, Archduke Olsius' eyes widened. His emotions were complicated. However, the instant he saw the motionless king, he felt an unspeakable sadness. Archduke Rockney's expression was sorrowful. Archduke Likes looked as if there were numerous burdens bearing down on him. On the other hand, Trentita shook his head, as if showing his disdain for the duel. Thales lowered his head and stared at the ground in a trance. He did not know what sort of expressions Nicholas and Poutre had on while they were behind him. Damn it, why? He clenched his fist slowly. King Nuven died here. Who's going to control Dragon Cloud City? Who can control Dragon Cloud City? Who knows how to control Dragon Cloud City? His thoughts became a mess. Having freed himself from the duel, Archduke Pofret kneeled before the king's dead body in a trance. Nuven, the born king, Nuven Walton, the king who had ruled Extit for nearly 30 years. He is dead. The young Archduke suddenly began laughing in a low voice. Ha ha ha. He threw his head back. His laughter became louder, more bizarre, as if he was a raving maniac. Ha ha ha. Laughing hysterically, the young Archduke suddenly turned and looked at the duel's witness, the High Priestess, Holm, who represented the bright moon goddess. Ha 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 ha. His body trembled continuously as he laughed. The High Priestess stared straight at Pofret. The beautiful pair of eyes above her veil were tranquil. Under her gaze, Pofret felt a surge of invisible pressure descending on him without a single sound. His smile slowly faded. The High Priestess was still calm as usual and expressed nothing. Pofret stopped smiling, his face sank slowly and he frowned doubtfully. In a trance, Thales was desperately thinking about his future. At this moment, behind Thales, Nicholas suddenly muttered in a low voice, "This explains it." Then, two massive sounds of collision rang throughout the hall. Bang, boom. It was followed by the sound of metal falling onto the ground. Cling clang. Thales quivered violently and was jolted from his thoughts. At the same time, many people in the Hall of Heroes cried out in disbelief. Thales immediately raised his head. He then widened his eyes and furrowed his brows tightly. And he saw the most unbelievable scene. It can't be. At that moment, Thales was so stunned that he even forgot to breathe. King Nuven, who was supposed to be lying dead on the ground, had struggled up at some point. He turned and pressed Pofret face down on the ground. The great axe that had pierced through the king's chest fell by their feet and was still vibrating constantly. Like the others, Thales fixated on the scene in front of him in surprise and bewilderment. The old king of Extit wore a fierce expression and was overbearing. He looped his left arm and held Pofret's right forearm from the back. Using his right hand, he secured the latter's right upper arm, and then pressed onto Pofret's back with his left knee. King Nuven had Pofret's right arm in a deadlock, pressing him to the floor. Thales widened his eyes in disbelief and subconsciously shook his head. How is this possible, with that injury? Thales was not the only one who thought this. From archdukes and vassals to servants and guards, everyone in the hall watched the unbelievable and unfathomable turn of events in shock. No, you were obviously, in the immense pain, panic, and terror. Archduke Pofret, whose right arm was deadlocked and face pressed hard on the ground, desperately struggled to free himself. At the same time, he cried out with a terrified expression, "No, impossible." He could not believe that the king, whose chest was pierced by the Griatax's spike just a moment ago, stood up again in the blink of an eye, as though he was not hurt at all. The front and back of his garment, at the chest area, were soaked in blood. It looked horrifying. But right now, the king's movement was unaffected, as if that injury did not exist. It was as though King Nuven was only pierced by a needle. Thales immediately turned his head back and impatiently asked the only supreme class elite at the scene. Why? Silence. Nicholas cut him off in a hurried voice. The Star Killer fixated on the scene, unwilling to miss a single detail. Watch everything, it has not ended yet. On the other hand, Poutre's face was filled with surprise, as though he could not accept what was happening, too. Impossible. The resurrected Nuven VII's face was red. The king pressed down Pofret's right upper arm with his right hand and pulled Pofret's right forearm with his left hand. Trembling, he slowly flexed his muscles. Using Pofret's elbow joint as a pivot, he moved Pofret's deadlocked forearm towards the opposite direction. The old king gritted his teeth, his expression was sinister. There is no such thing as impossible on the battlefield. As King Nuven increased his force, Pofret's deadlocked right arm started to become deformed. His forearm moved forward in a terrifying fashion. The sound of muscles breaking sounded clearly. Ah, ah, Pofret's face twisted from the pain. He let out a heart-wrenching scream. The Archduke desperately extended his left arm to the back, to the frenzied King Nuven. But it was futile, and he could only grapple at the air. There was no way he could free himself from such a tight grip. I killed you, without a doubt, I killed you. Pofret's neck was pressed against the floor. Writhing continuously from the inhuman pain, he roared in agony. You were dead. Am I? Tightly restraining his opponent, King Nuven revealed a fierce expression that carried hints of hatred and insanity. His tone was piercing cold. Perhaps, I was not thoroughly dead enough. As he spoke, Nuven VII continued to thoroughly and methodically exert force with his hands. The tearing sound that came from Pofret's forearm was terrifying and unending. It sent a chill down Thales' spine. The young Archduke struggled frantically. He tried to reach his enemy with his left hand, but he could not, and he could only strike the ground with it. However, Pofret's struggles were futile under King Nuven's experienced and brutal deadlocking. He could not utilize the strength of his youthful physique at all. He could only frantically move the remaining parts of his body, like a fish waiting to be butchered on the chopping board. Then, crack! A rattling sound came from Pofret's arm. Pofret tried to raise his head, which was pressed to the ground, as high as he could. His face was extremely contorted, and he could not help but tear up. He widened his mouth in pain and let out a sudden, frenzied howl. Ah, no, 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 ah. His right forearm was already bent backward starting from his elbow joint. Under the immense pain and tremors, Pofret resisted King Nuven's strength, but he could only raise his chest an inch from the ground. However, Pofret's nightmare had not ended yet. King Nuven suddenly raised his right hand that was pressing on his opponent's right arm. He clenched his fist and dealt a heavy blow to the back of Pofret's head. Bang! Pofret's head was pummeled to the ground again. His forehead hit the floor tiles with a deep, dull sound. But King Nuven did not stop there. He let go of Pofret's already disabled right arm and extended his right hand, grabbing his opponent's left arm. He then deadlocked Pofret's only remaining arm using the same technique. The only difference was the orientation, with his right hand securing Pofret's forearm and his left hand pressing Pofret's upper arm. King Nuven sucked in a deep breath, then continued with the exertion. Pofret recovered from the short spell of dizziness. He immediately felt a surge of panic. His right arm was in continuous pain and numbness, and with his intact left arm being tightly deadlocked, the young Archduke realized something. He turned his head to look behind in despair. Why? Tears of pain rolled down Pofret's cheeks as he questioned his opponent indignantly. Staring at Pofret's eyes, King Nuven sneered in satisfaction. On the battlefield, wounds that penetrate through the chest are usually fatal. Most people who get injured that way can only leave their lives to fate. The king watched his opponent, like a hawk that watched a rabbit. Especially if the wound penetrates through the rib cage. King Nuven continued exerting force with his arms as he spoke, emanating a chilly aura. Your lung will become a broken airbox, and breathing will become harder than raising your hand. Every time you inhale, you can even feel the tear as the air seeps out of your lung through the wound. You will start coughing with increasing intensity, more violent and painful. Your breaths will become weaker, harder to draw, and more painful. Your entire lung will slowly become soaked in blood. Blood will flow from your throat, mouth and nose as you breathe and cough. Within that intense pain and the chest pain, the pit of your stomach will feel extremely heavy. You will then feel even more numbed as you lose strength and consciousness. If you also have fractured ribs, congratulations, the tiny bone fragments will torture you horribly. They will penetrate deep inside your muscles, chafe your nervous system, and puncture your blood vessels. They will torture your mind and body with pain and agony until you surrender yourself to death and extend your hand towards hell. Even if the wound is closed in time, and the external bleeding is stopped, it would be useless. At first, you will cough out more blood, and then you will cough out lesser and lesser blood until you die. Those who are fortunate would die in a few minutes. The unlucky ones would wail late into the night, and die painfully with a terrifying fever, cold sweat, and hallucinations. I have seen too many tragedies like this on the battlefield. Pofret widened his eyes. His forehead was drenched in cold sweat from the pain. The king flashed a smile and changed the topic. But, King Nuven leaned in beside Pofret's ear and said with a hideous expression, you know, the human ribcage only takes up a certain area, not the whole chest. Sometimes, your rib cage is not hurt from the penetration, and the vital arteries are also avoided. Let's say only the muscles between your right shoulder and your right chest is penetrated from the front to the back, perfectly grazing past your rib cage and bones. You can then use your power of eradication to expand the wounded muscles to stop the bleeding. How is that possible? Pofret gritted his teeth, and the veins on his face protruded. He stared behind in despair at King Nuven. I told you, brat. King Nuven's power of eradication surged up his arms. He laughed in satisfaction. There is no such thing as impossible on the battlefield. Finally, another chilling rattle rang throughout the hall, along with Pofret's miserable cries. Snap. Pofret writhed on the ground in a frenzy and wailed miserably, showing his pain and despair right then and there. His only remaining arm was also bent by King Nuven, the young Archduke had lost both hands. A few seconds later, Pofret's struggling and roaring started to become weaker, and his whole body convulsed without end. He let out dreary moans. The other archdukes watched the scene in disbelief. What does this mean? Archduke Trendita tried his best to calm his breathing. Unexpectedly, Archduke Rockney was the one who replied him. Having been silent for a long time, he said coldly, "It means the end." Thales watched in a daze as the king completed his counterattack. A quick, fierce, effective and permanent counterattack. He could not even see how the king started turning the tables. His Majesty was pierced by the axe's spike while lying on the ground. Behind Thales, Nicholas sighed. All of us in Pofret only knew that His Majesty's chest was pierced through, but we could not clearly see where the spike came out from on the back. There was no way to determine if that was a fatal wound. And that was exactly what the king had planned. Thales focused on King Neuvin's chest, especially the blood-soaked area to the right. Panting, King Neuvin flung off his opponent's no longer functional arm and stood up. At that moment, Thales found the king's valiant figure extremely tall and large. King Neuvin's gaze swept past everyone in the hall. He was met with all kinds of gazes ranging from excited ones to surprised ones to bewildered ones. Wine, King Neuvin roared suddenly, loud and furious. Strong rye wine, the strongest kind. Thales froze immediately. Some of the servants and guards looked hesitantly at the High Priestess of Bright Moon Temple and the other archdukes. However, High Priestess Holm remained still. On the other hand, the archduke stared at the king with startled expressions. Lying on the ground, Pofret stopped moaning. He raised his head and looked at his opponent with a devastated and numb expression. Enough, King Neuvin roared impatiently. It's not like I will suffocate him with the wine goblet. All of you thrice-cursed bastards, give me the wine now. In the name of the king. The king's administrator, Lord Merk, sighed and waved his hand, fulfilling the king's prerogative. A full wood barrel of rye wine was soon carried over. King Neuvin snatched the metal wine goblet that was sent over. He lifted the wooden cover open and scooped up a cupful of wine, then raised his head and gulped it down furiously. Wine spilled from the corner of his lips and dribbled down the king's beard that spanned from his chin to his neck. The old king finished the strong wine from the goblet in one gulp and wiped his chin in satisfaction. He then scooped another cupful of wine. This time, King Neuvin violently tore off the part of his clothing that covered his right shoulder, revealing his muscles that were aged but firm. The wounds that resulted from being pierced by the axe spike earlier was clearly revealed. There was one on the king's chest and another on his back. However, the wounds were not near the middle of his chest, closer to the shoulder. The wounds were starting to fill up from the squeezing muscles. King Neuvin raised his wine goblet with clenched teeth, tilted it, and poured the wine on his wounds. Drenched in strong wine, the muscles in his right shoulder trembled constantly, but King Neuvin's expression was ice-cold as usual, as if his wounds were not actually immersed in hard liquor. Everyone in the hall watched the scene in silence. No one interrupted him. On the ground beside the king, Archduke Pofret, with both arms broken, roared in a deep voice. Once again, he wore an indignant and resentful gaze. He propped up his upper body with his head and tried to stand with the help of his knees. However, King Neuvin mercilessly stepped on the archduke's back and pressed him back onto the ground. At first Pofret moaned in pain, then he roared in indignation. No, how did you do it? The young archduke's expression was dark. He fixed his glare on King Neuvin, as if he wanted to cut a piece of flesh off the king's body. Why did you think that you could easily pierce through my chest with your axe spike? King Neuvin's expression was like usual. He scooped up another goblet of wine and finished it in one gulp. Brat, I lured you into it. I am inferior to you in terms of strength and stamina. I will lose sooner or later in an axe fight. Stepping on Pofret's back, King Neuvin spat in disdain. However, even though you are a supreme class elite, the moment you relax, you become totally useless. King Neuvin's eyes shone with bright light. Pofret's eyes widened, his face was pressed against the ground, and his lips trembled. He began letting out incoherent roars again. These roars were filled with misery and pain. Let me give you some advice. Don't relax before you break your opponent's neck. Feeling drained and tired, King Neuvin exhaled slowly. His tone was icy cold. This is the most valuable teaching we obtained from the thousands of hellish years battling the orcs. King Neuvin raised his head again and finished his third goblet of wine in one gulp. Behind Thales, Poutre asked plainly, is this the alleged battle instinct of warriors that soldiers often talk about? Instinct, Nicholas replied with a sneer. This is a battle tactic. From beginning to end, the duel was within His Majesty's estimation and control. It went according to the steps His Majesty had planned. Poutre revealed a puzzled expression. From the beginning, His Majesty lured Pofret to stab him with the axe spike instead of killing him by chopping at him with its blade. The Star Killer crossed his arms. There was a hint of a smile in his gaze. His Majesty looked as if he was waving his axe and defending passively without the strength to fight back, backing away step by step. In reality, every time their axes clashed, the distance between them was reduced unknowingly. In the end, when His Majesty collapsed, both of them were already face to face, and Pofret could no longer use his axe blade to chop at his majesty. Thales was struck by a thought. He looked at the distance between the two men and the positions of the two Griataxes. Pofret was led by his majesty to end the battle with the axe spike, said the head of White Blade Guards flatly. Lying on the floor, his majesty controlled Pofret's axe with his hands so that it was pierced into the muscle between his rib cage and his shoulder blades. His majesty inflicted that wound on himself. It was awfully painful, but definitely not fatal. Thales inhaled deeply and looked at King Nuven. An efficient but unscrupulous hunter, huh? Poutre added to Nicholas's explanation in an emotional tone. What's left to be done was to wait for Pofret, whom was already frenzied by the king's provocation, to think that he had won the duel. The king then seized the opportunity, utilizing a loophole that could totally negate Pofret's advantage in terms of stamina and strength, to launch a decisive counterattack. I hope that you will watch this rare scene carefully and benefit from it, Your Highness, the vice diplomat said to his prince faintly. Thales could only shake his head slowly. Pofret claimed that he had obtained understanding of his majesty's battle style from his grandfather, but he knew nothing at all. Nicholas's pale face shone in the firelight. This is truly a ferocious counterattack that takes down the enemy with one blow. Memorable. Beside them, the Marquis from Camus Union sighed in praise and said, This did not surprise you at all, did it? Nicholas nodded slowly. Yes, Pofret's every move was within his majesty's calculations. Poutre sighed and said, There is a saying in Constellation's western frontlines, on the battlefield, even a dying veteran is 10,000 times stronger than a novice of great strength. The leader of the king's team of personal guards snorted softly. A veteran encountering a rookie. The outcome of this duel was already preordained. Chapter 152 Shadow. Having drunk enough wine, the king threw down his wine goblet and exercised his joints. He snorted softly at Pofret, who laid on the ground. Brat, you have the guts to mention the war from 12 years ago. The destruction and gore 12 years ago, how much of it can you comprehend? King Nuven glared disdainfully at his prey, who had lost both arms. You were only a pampered heir to a suzerain. Your grandfather only let you stay in the main camp, the safest one. He didn't even allow you to transport baggage. Thales saw that the young archduke's eyes were bloodshot and he stared straight ahead in a daze. It was as if he had forgotten about the immense pain in his arms. However, perhaps your grandfather was right. Letting trash like you transport supplies and baggage, what if you had encountered Horus Jadastar, who raided supplies from the rear? Having said this, King Nuven's face dimmed. Perhaps all these accursed nonsense would not have happened. A few seconds later, being pressed hard on the ground, Pofret burst into a laughter, though no one knew the meaning behind his laughter. And the so-called trauma you got from the war is bullshit. King Nuven continued suppressing his anger, up to the point he could no longer do so. Without Dragon Cloud City and the Walton family, all of you are nothing. He removed his leg from stepping on Pofret's back and kicked the archduke's stomach hard. Thales frowned as he recalled his time in the abandoned house where he was often punched and kicked. After enduring the kick, Pofret curled up his body and moaned in pain. All the more so, you shouldn't have targeted at Mariah. King Nuven lowered his head and, with a pained expression, bellowed in a deep voice, he thought that you were his friend. Crooked betrayer, hypocritical coward. The furious king extended his leg again and kicked Pofret's chest hard. Bang! A dull thud was heard clearly. Pofret curled up again. The heavy impact made him cough relentlessly. His coughing slowly died down and he unfolded his curled-up body. His two arms, bent backwards, looked hideous. The archduke let out a strange laugh that sounded like a cry. Ha ha ha! Pofret suppressed his laughter, but to Thales, the laughter was very dreary and bitter. King Nuven's face became more unpleasant. Grinding his teeth, he glared at his enemy with a horrifying expression. The young archduke suddenly stopped laughing. He raised his head and shot King Nuven a furious gaze. You're right, I did that. Pofret glared fiercely at the old king and panted as he spoke. Mariah told me about his secret mission to visit Constellation and redraft the contract. I was the only one he told. Such an honor. You admit it. King Nuven's expression was grim. His gaze burned with hatred and anguish. You only have the guts to own up when you are facing death, is that it? Yes, without putting in any effort, I could use his trust in me to swindle information about his visit to Constellation, Pofret replied the king with a mocking smile, including his itinerary, arrangements, plans and even the members of the diplomat group. King Nuven kicked Pofret's abdomen harshly again with his armored boot. Pofret rolled around in pain, away from King Nuven. King Nuven chuckled coldly and raised his voice. Just because you felt that you were treated unfairly, you killed my son and betrayed your friend. The alleged position at Beacon Illumination City was just an excuse you used for your own selfish indifference. You can even, your own father, what can a person like you do? Under the immense pain of having two broken arms, Pofret moaned softly. His forehead was drenched in sweat, but when he heard the king's words, he made a great effort to raise his head and released a choked laughter. Unfair. Pofret's laughter was strange and frenzied. My God, you really know no shame at all. You are indeed our born king. Unfair, ha ha ha. Then, Pofret's expression changed. He turned towards the 4 archdukes. Stop pretending, all of you. The young archduke's words were full of fury. Ulcius, Trendita, Rockney, and Lecco, don't tell me that all of you dare swear in the name of your ancestors that you are not grateful and glad at all for that I have done. Do you dare slap your chest and say that you don't feel even a hint of relief and joy over Mariah's death and the Walton family's loss of power and decline at all? The archdukes chose to respond with silence. At that moment, even Trendita, the craftiest one among them, did not speak anymore. Thales felt the atmosphere in the hall become tense, as if the duel had expanded to the area beyond the 2 men. On the other hand, King Nuvan was silent. Step by step, he walked slowly towards Pofret. Panting, Pofret threw his shoulders apart and squirmed on the floor like a snake. Watching the archduke writhing on the floor, Thales did not feel any relief from the fact that the truth was out in the daylight, nor did he feel relief from getting his revenge. There was only an unspeakable sorrow. Gritting his teeth and with great effort, Pofret squirmed forward while speaking. The 10 archdukes, after your death, there will be a fair and just election for the next king, right? King Nuvan stopped walking. With his back to the king, Pofret crawled to the middle of the hall. He turned his body around with great effort to face King Nuvan. His voice was filled with hatred. In the south, you promised Reformation Tower early on that you would arbitrate in Trendita's favor in their dispute with Elifer City for that piece of borderland, in exchange for his support. You have little Ulcius, who escaped to Dragon Cloud City after failing in his contention to become Archduke, in your hands. He is a bargaining chip for you to interfere in Prestige Orchid Region's right of succession. Therefore, no matter how dissatisfied Archduke Ulcius is, he won't dare speak out. Since your father's time, all of you have relied on Dragon Cloud City's location to forcefully reroute the trading route to the Glacier Sea in the northeast. You threatened the Cameron family with cutting the route off unless they voted for you to become king. Of course, there's also the Pofret family that rose to prominence because of your and your father's support. Both of you tamed the Hound, and Beacon Illumination City became a tame lapdog that submits at the blow of your whistle. King Nuvan furrowed his brows tightly. The hall was filled with whispers. Thales was feeling doubt in his heart. Pofret continued to speak in a grievous and agonized tone. To the north, the bald old man Lecco from Defense City would only remain neutral and, at the most pivotal moment, choose the family that would definitely win. The Stustel family, located to the northernmost of Extit, had always chosen their kings based on who supported them in fending off the orcs. Pofret rose from the ground into a kneeling position. He straightened his upper body and turned his head around abruptly to glare at King Nuvan, whose gaze was icy cold. He said forlornly, for the next King Selection Congress, you and your family had already arranged to secure 4 votes. And with these votes, the 2 archdukes from the north are destined to vote for your family. King Nuvan's face was livid with anger. He clenched his fists, making rattling sounds. In the upcoming King Selection Congress, the other alleged archdukes stand no chance at all. Unfair, this is what true unfairness is, Pofret growled in a low voice. His words sent a chill down the spines of every person in the hall. Decades ago, your grandfather made arrangements before his death for the king selection system for your father to be crowned. From then on, all of you manipulated everything in the dark through all kinds of distasteful tactics, under the banner of fair competition and the open selection of the king. To put the predetermined person on the throne and silence all opposition, our King Selection Congress is nothing but an act to crown him. King Nuvan walked forward in large strides. Thales sighed internally. Is this the truth of their king selection system? He recalled what Poutre told him about the history of the establishment of Extit's king selection system. The archdukes who opposed each other with equal harshness since Rakeru's death. Pofret wore a disgusted expression and glared face to face at his opponent, whose face was livid with anger. From then onwards, there was no Archduke Walton of Dragon Cloud City, only King Walton of Extit. Bah, he clenched his teeth, as if he wanted to chew King Nuvan into pieces. Don't tell me that you didn't know why we call you the Born King. It's not because of how gifted or formidable you are, but because you were destined to become the common elected king of Extit ever since you were born. Curse you, you born king. What disgusts me most is that all of you have the audacity to claim that Extit is a jointly ruled kingdom that runs on a king selection system. Pofret was starting to lose control of his emotions. Under the Walton family's oppression, how are we different from kingdoms like Constellation that are ruled by a degenerate, hereditary royal family? How are we different from the tyrannical empire? Sooner or later, a madman like Constellation's 82nd will appear and drag the entire kingdom down to hell. Hearing this familiar name, Thales felt a chill running down his spine. That was his grandfather. Drag the entire kingdom, down to hell. Suddenly, someone gently tapped his shoulder. It was Poutre who stood behind him. Thales exhaled with difficulty and refocused his attention on the scene. King Nuvan walked forward with a cold gaze and extended his leg mercilessly to kick Pofret back on the ground. Thud. The young archduke, whose hands were handicapped and could not even maintain his balance, was swept down onto the floor once more. Falling heavily on the floor, Pofret continued to bellow, singing the praises of the joint ruling pledge and hypocritically claiming that we have the freedom and right to choose our king, but monopolizing all the power in the dark and predetermining the king for your benefit. Where else in the world is there such a shameless, crooked, hypocritical, sanctimonious, and disgusting ruler? All of you made Exted a hereditary kingdom of the Walton family a long time ago. The Walton royal family, such irony. Reikaru's joint ruling pledge had long since been ruined by this shameless family his nephew left behind. Thales' breathing became uneven. Everything that happened before his eyes was like a mirror to him. At that moment, hearing Pofret's accusations, he did not think of Exted. Instead, he thought of Constellation. He thought of Kessel's ice-cold expression and the one-eyed dragon's solemn gaze. He thought of the doubtful 6 great clans and 13 distinguished families who each had their own axe to grind. Thales sighed internally and involuntarily clenched his fists. Pofret wriggled his body with all his might and struggled up from the floor once more. That's not all. Your father married off his daughter to the previous Archduke of Black Sand, and tried to meddle with Black Sand region's affairs by controlling their bloodline. Harboring malicious intent, you purchased crystal drops mines from Kemu Union and supplied crystal drops to Elifer City in the east at a low price. Nominally, it is to fend off the threat from the eastern peninsula. In actuality, it is so that you can cut off the supply at a vital time and force the Gadro family into submission. God knows what tactics you have planned for Rockney, from the city of faraway prayers in the west. I reckon that it has something to do with that Camion whose territory is close to the city of faraway prayers, hasn't it? What is it this time? A seemingly splendid contract that is actually filled with traps. Upon hearing this, Thales could not help but turn his head back around. Marquis Shiles from Kemu Union felt the crowd's gazes on him. He coughed awkwardly and turned his head away. Pofret's face had long since been drained of all color. He did not try to get up anymore, instead he lay face down on the floor in resignation. His tone was grim. Other than this, you also want to emulate Constellation in stationing tax collectors who report directly to the king, all over the kingdom, to meddle with the suzerains' tax collection in their own territories. You want to dispatch your officials to the entire kingdom starting from Beacon Illumination City. This humiliation, oppression, and unfairness is not only for me. It's not something new either. Panting, Pofret's voice became weaker. How can we not rebel? Rebel, so, this is why you murdered Mariah. To exact revenge on the Walton family. King Nuven's gaze flickered a little. By betraying your friend, only a coward like you. Pofret paused for a moment. His gaze became complicated and indecipherable. Panting, Pofret's voice was low. Yes, Mariah, we used to be friends. I also told myself that everything would get better, but... Nuven Walton, the young Archduke's expression changed, as if he had just made a painful decision. He raised his head and laughed miserably with his eyes closed. It's all your fault. You're the one who forced me to do this. Me. King Nuven's voice was low and terrifying, like muffled thunder before a storm. While trembling, Pofret raised his head, his gaze was sinister, and with a loud voice, he said, 5 years ago, after I refused your request to have an official of yours be stationed in Beacon Illumination City. Strangely enough, some of my vassals immediately came forward with suspicions over my legitimacy. Trendita started provoking me at my borders in a conceited fashion. The people in my territory began talking about my abilities. Soon, my vassals started rebelling, my people started protesting against taxes, my territory was in chaos. When I was forced into a corner and was in a disheveled state, you had Mariah come forward to stop all of this with a letter you wrote. While reading your hypocritical letter of consolation, I raised my head to look at Mariah. He was giggling and recalling our past. I only understood then that we were never friends. I am only Dragon Cloud City's B*TCH. And you still don't know what kind of trash Mariah is. The veins in Pofret's face bulged, and his brown hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked hideous and flustered. I have had enough of the silly grin on his face. From his perspective, the whole world was beautiful. Pofret's eyes were red. He struggled to get up with all his might and roared hysterically at everyone in the Hall of Heroes. He was a naive, weak, hesitant, useless, and short-sighted piece of trash with no ambition at all. Ha ha ha. Under King Nuven's extremely gloomy expression, Pofret's upper body trembled. He laughed so hard that he was close to tears. Did you know that, Mariah, that trash, his biggest dream was to become an adventuring mercenary, to travel the world, ha 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 ha, mercenary, adventuring, ha 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 ha. Oh, he even fell for a prostitute, a coquettish, hair-stroking tramp. He even said that he wanted to make her his wife. Thales shook his head. He recalled what King Nuven said about Prince Mariah the first time Thales met the king and the archdukes. Pofret laughed so hard that he was close to tears. King Nuven furrowed his brows tightly. Pofret, on the other hand, laughed morbidly. Amid his raging emotions and the intense pain from his arms, he rolled on the floor without pause. His face was covered in tears and snot. The esteemed Prince Mariah, the once future Archduke of Dragon Cloud City, wanted to marry a lowly tramp who was FCKED by thousands of people. Ha 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 ha. He was even the predetermined king of Exted. Think about it, the great Exted having a prostitute for a queen. All the vassals and people would have to bow and salute to a tramp. Ha ha ha. Many of the people in the hall who watched him lowered their heads and sighed. King Nuven did not cut him off. Instead, he continued glaring at Pofred with his terrifying gaze. This sort of man, this sort of trash, this sort of totally oblivious and completely irresponsible creature was actually the Walton family heir. Pofred stopped laughing. He lifted his gaze, which was indignant and filled with hatred. And against my will, I had to pledge my loyalty to him, and elect him to become king. Not because of his abilities, but because of his surname and his father. You asked me why I chose Lampod, the Archduke of Black Sand, whose heart is as black as the name of his territory. That animal who killed his own brother. Archduke Pofred's gaze was fiery and he roared thunderously, I did not choose Lampod. Instead, I chose a future without the Walton family, a future where the king of Exted is not predetermined. I'm truly happy, because I've finally destroyed the last of your bloodline. He glared at King Nuven with clenched teeth. The next common elected king of Exted will not be a Walton anymore. King Nuven responded with a fierce kick to Pofred's face. King Nuven grabbed his collar and said coldly, before that, I will destroy you first. The young Archduke laughed miserably. He shook his head and looked to his side. At Thales Jadastar. Thales' heart immediately tightened. What's happening? Hey, you, little brat from Constellation, Pofred shouted, causing everyone to focus their attention on Thales. You, covered in wounds, the Archduke spoke with difficulty and let out a dreary laugh. You are very pleased with yourself, aren't you? A prince of Constellation flaunting his prowess in Exted's capital city, making a fool out of all the Archdukes. Thales frowned. He could sense the hostility of the gazes from all the people in the hall. After all, he was an ECKSTEDT. Your days are numbered, Pofred said venomously. Did you think that I only tried to assassinate you to protect myself? What the Archduke said after that made Thales freeze. You don't know how much those men, want your life. Pofred panted, enduring the immense pain in his arms. I saw through their intentions when I hired them, they're not just after the money. Thales' breaths quickened. The young Archduke continued to speak. Even in their dreams they desired to kill every person in the Jadastar family and take over Renaissance Palace. They couldn't do anything in Constellation because they are fugitives hated by everyone there. But here in Exted, they did not give any reaction when they received my money. Pofred's gaze was fiery. However, when those assassins heard that the target was Constellation's Jadastar royal family heir, they looked so excited. What, assassins? Thales stared at Pofred in a daze, and only managed to react after a few seconds. Who are they? Who else? Pofred shouted with a satisfied expression. Of course they're those dishonorable assassins. They were the ones who infiltrated Lampard's army and utilized his mystic gun unit to assassinate you beyond the fortress. They are your family's greatest enemy. Thales stared at him in disbelief. Jadastar family's greatest enemy. Then Pofred laughed maniacally and uttered a name that made everyone frown. The Shadow Shield. Chapter 153. Have a drink. Thales was stunned for a good 10 seconds. Shadow Shield. He heard Gilbert give an account on this before. It appeared in the tragedy of the Bloody Year with the Charlton family as the direct murderers of the Jadastar family. He recalled the memory of a stone urn in the Jadastar family tomb at Renaissance Palace. From the eldest Prince Midir, to Horace, down to the twin princes, Bancroft and Herman, and the youngest, Princess Constance Jadastar. Thales stared at Pofred in disbelief. But the Shadow Shield, murdering me, how could it? That's enough. His thoughts were interrupted. King Nuven's voice rang throughout the hall. The king threw Pofred on the ground with a sullen face. As long as I am in Dragon Cloud City, I will not allow something as despicable as an assassination to happen again. HMPH, Pofred sneered, and through gritted teeth he said, Tyrant. King Nuven narrowed his eyes before his helpless enemy. Just finish it already. Pofred's lips curled upwards, a cold expression on his face. I'm going watch the destruction of your family from Hell's River. Finish it. King Nuven clenched his fists a little. He remained silent for a few seconds. A seemingly complex emotion surfaced in his eyes. Eventually, King Nuven closed his eyes and exhaled through his nose. This duel hasn't ended yet, but I can spare you a chance. Under the scrutiny of the crowd, the old king opened his eyes. He said plainly, admit defeat now. Confess to everyone your crimes and your conspiracy with Lampard. You can still fight for your life. Pofred was completely stunned. What? But you will live the rest of your life in prison. Your brother will be granted Beacon Illumination City, so that the Pofrets maintain rule of that piece of land. The old king had a piercing look in his eyes. Aside from you, Beacon Illumination City will not suffer any punishment. How about that? Everyone in the hall was immediately stunned. Pofred on the other hand, just stared blankly at the king. I killed your last living son, he said, rather absent-mindedly. King Nuven's eyes darkened. That's right, you killed my son. Pofred watched as the king's expression changed. Thales saw struggle and pain within his eyes. The young Archduke lowered his head, and his breaths quickened. Thales pondered about the king's offer. At this moment, Poutre whispered into his ear, if he agrees to it, Beacon Illumination City will never make enemies with the Waltons if they want to secure their rule. Thales nodded in agreement, while Nicholas gave a cold snort. A few seconds later, Pofret slowly raised his head. A bitter smile appeared on his desolate face. Really? Really, King Nuven said indifferently. Just say the word and you can continue breathing Northland air. At once, the hall was engulfed in silence. Not long after that, Pofred retracted his smile. His face was icy cold, and his gaze steely. The young Archduke looked straight into the king's eyes. He was fuming with rage, but he resolutely said two words, hell no. Thales shook his head. Well, this is Northland, Nicholas whispered behind Thales. To be pardoned by your enemy is also considered a disgrace. King Nuven sighed, but immediately afterwards, he raised his head and gave Pofred a gentle smile. Good boy. With a complicated expression on his face, the old king smiled as he spoke. Suddenly, Pofred stomped the ground with his left leg and pushed himself up from the floor. Then, with a roar, he rammed his body against King Nuven's. He was met with an effortless kick from the old king that accurately struck his calf bone. Thud. Pofred lost his balance again and fell face down on the ground. Pofred unleashed his final howl, filled with the refusal to admit defeat. King Nuven shook his head. He stood up and held down Pofred's back using his knee. He then reached out to hold Pofred's head tightly in his hands and lifted him up to where the four archdukes could see. Olsius, Trentida, Rockney and Lecco watched their king steadily. In the next moment, the common elected king of Exted, Nuven Walton VII, roared in his elderly yet bold voice. Look, it echoed throughout the hall. King Nuven furiously bellowed his next words. This is the enemy of the Waltons. A smile of relief appeared on Pofred's somber face. Amid the gasps from the crowd, the old king twisted with his two hands. Crack. The crisp snap of the neck traveled to Thales' ear. Thump. Pofred collapsed onto the floor, but this time, his head was face up, staring at the ceiling with a blank gaze. King Nuven sat down on the ground. He stared at his enemy's body with a vacant expression on his face. Nobody said a word. There was only the uneven breathing of the crowd, mixed with the whistling of the windy snowfall outside and the spitting of fire from the braziers. The dead silence persisted for a good few seconds. It only stopped when a light, charming voice came from the other end of the hall. Death is just an overdue homecoming, head priestess Holm of Bright Moon Temple faintly said. She crossed her arms again and lowered her body slightly as the eyes beneath her veil closed slowly. Victory and defeat has been distinguished. The sacred duel is thus concluded. As her voice fell, the head priestess of Bright Moon Temple left. The Red Witch laughed and followed her out. The people in the hall could finally exhale. It was over. Servants and guards quickly rushed forward at the wave of Lord Merc's hand. The physicians as well as apothecarists, who were on standby hurriedly dashed over to King Nuven's side to bandage the wounds on his chest and face. The king's ministers, vassals, and the four archdukes left their spectating positions with mixed feelings and thoughts. Marquis Shiles sighed, I was wrong. I'm not going to be able to brag about this duel for a whole year, it's enough to last me a lifetime now. Nicholas shot him a piercing glance as he walked down to the center of the hall. He started to direct the White Blade guards on carrying out reparations. It's been a complicated day, my beloved prince. Shiles held his hat up and saluted politely. My apologies for not accompanying you further. I must head back to estimate the business losses we might suffer in Beacon Illumination City, hopefully they do not exceed King Nuven's rewards. Thales shrugged as he watched the Camion depart. Thales turned around and sarcastically whispered, what a fruitful day. Poutre, we should discuss about Shadow Shield. Aside from this, Thales still had many matters and doubts he intended to ask his well-informed vice diplomat. I agree, Poutre nodded cautiously yet solemnly. At this moment, the four of you, the old king's aged voice came from afar. Do you have any objections regarding this duel? King Nuven looked up, his gaze pierced through the crowd and fixed itself on the four archdukes. The hall was quiet again as everyone turned their eyes on the four archdukes. The archdukes had varying expressions on their faces, but Thales could feel a common heaviness and alertness. After all, a fellow colleague just died there. No, Archduke Rockney replied in a cold tone. He gently said, this was a holy duel, a righteous revenge, fair and justified. Pofred also confessed his crimes. Trentida continued to smile, while Olsius remained silent as Lecco looked away, his expression indistinguishable. King Nuven scrutinized the long-haired archduke for a few seconds and suddenly sneered. It'd be a wonder if the answer is no, King Nuven scoffed. You've all been dissatisfied for a long time, haven't you? Thales suddenly felt the nervous atmosphere in the hall pick up again. That was, until King Nuven spoke his next words. You do not have to worry anymore. King Nuven slowly sighed. I will send a messenger crow tomorrow to give word regarding the honorable passing of the Archduke of Beacon Illumination City. The city will be succeeded by this man's brother, he should be looking forward to it already. The Archduke stumbled slightly. In the next king selection, the Walton family will be hopeless, the old king desolately said. We neither have enough prestige nor the right candidate for this. Archduke Olsius frowned. Your Majesty. King Nuven spoke incessantly and interrupted Olsius, but at least, before my death, I can still do something for my family in Dragon Cloud City. He raised his head, and his eyes were laced with a biting cold intent. The archdukes collectively trembled. Like what? Archduke Olsius asked softly with utmost caution. King Nuven revealed a smile. War, the old king softly said. It will be a new year soon. After the spring of next year, I will start enlisting troops for Dragon Cloud City. Upon hearing that, a chill ran through Thales' heart. Could it be? The four archdukes were startled as well. Constellation, Archduke Olsius frightened Thales as he shot him an ill-meaning glance. Luckily, King Nuven's next words allowed the Constellation Prince to let out a sigh of relief. No. I feel like going for a stroll in Black Sand region, said King Nuven, who was sitting in the center of the hall under the care of a physicist. He patted his thighs in a relaxed manner. I want to see my dear nephew, Chapman Lampod. The archdukes frowned. Thales included. I miss him, the old king said with a glimmer in his eyes. I miss him so much that I want his life. Archduke Olsius and Trentida, whose territories neighbor Black Sand region, frowned at the same time. But, I don't like loneliness, so I do not wish to go alone. King Nuven looked sharply at the four archdukes. What do you say? They kept their silence until the old king solemnly said, after visiting him, shall we discuss the matter of the king selection? The four archdukes exchanged glances. This time, they quickly made a decision. Defense City will be sending troops in response. We will stand by your side eternally, the bald Archduke Lecco was the first to say with a sigh. Archduke Olsius solemnly nodded as well. Prestige Orchid region has no objections. We will also send out reinforcements. This is an appropriate avengement to warn those secretly plotting. Archduke Rockney's gaze burned. The city of Faraway Prayers is also willing to provide assistance. Since all of you have agreed, if Reformation Tower doesn't send troops, how can I even walk out of Dragon Cloud City alive? Trentida exclaimed. Of course the king is going to take the lead in eliminating a competitor for you, what could you possibly have against that? Thales criticized in silence. King Nuven looked at them and laughed out loud. At this moment, Archduke Olsius could not help but ask, what about Black Sand region? Let Chapman's son succeed the archduke's position. King Nuven paused his laughter and shook his head lightly. I have a candidate in mind already. He is definitely a good one for the position of archduke. He stretched his previously bandaged arm. Caslin Lampod, Chapman's uncle, the former head of my personal guards team. Thales was stunned as he recalled the sturdy, elderly uncle from Hero Tavern. I heard that he has no interest in any positions of power, and that he hated his family, Archduke Rockney said flatly. That's right, but it is not up to him. King Nuven laughed softly. The archdukes were slightly startled. All right, the old king pushed his physician aside and stood proudly. He yelled at the top of his voice, everyone, let us adjourn upstairs. The banquet is still on. King Nuven addressed the crowd and laughed. Don't lose your spirits. The four archdukes exchanged glances. With varying expressions, they bowed and left. The members of his imperial conference collectively left as well. Thales noticed the smile disappearing from the old king's face as everyone turned around. You may go as well. King Nuven shook his head and said to the white blade guards. Just stand guard outside the hall. Nuven VII heaved a sigh and grabbed a wine barrel. Desolately, he sat on the steps where the battle occurred. I will sit here alone. Nicholas and Merc exchanged a look and nodded. Thales and Poutre's eyes met. Very cautiously, they departed with the crowd. This night has gone on long enough. And it has been very enriching as well. At this moment, King Nuven's voice rang. Thales, my dear guest. Thales quivered. The people who had yet to leave the hall collectively set their gazes on the Prince of Constellation. Particularly, the three archdukes and in particularly, Archduke Lecco, who looked like he was deep in thought. Why don't you stay behind? King Nuven patted the steps next to him, seemingly at peace. I have yet to thank you properly, let's have a drink together. Thales' mouth hung open as he stared awkwardly at the king. What a joke. After I've stepped on the toes of a bunch of archdukes, after you snapped one of their necks and forced the rest to join you in battle. You want to have a drink together. What I want to do now is immediately vanish and keep a low profile. Once the timing is right, I am going to go home. This is not how you provoke someone, man. He turned around to meet Poutre's eyes. The latter shook his head lightly. It is an honor to have the privilege of drinking with you, but I am only 7. Thales turned back to face King Nuven. In a polite but mocking manner, he said, plus, I am drained. What a joke, 7 years old. However, King Nuven discontentedly interrupted the second prince and raised his wine goblet. When my father took me drinking for the first time, I was only 5, as the future king, how could you not know how to drink? Baffled, Thales prepared his next excuse. Do you mean that you intend to reject the invitation of the Extachian king? King Nuven revealed a sly expression. Even you, like the fellow lying on the ground, look down upon this dying king. The atmosphere in the hall grew odd again and Thales' heart rate started to pick up. He could only bow his head and sigh. Nonetheless, he turned around and started to walk under Poutre's concerned gaze, Nicholas's frown, Shile's smile and the four archdukes' queer stares. Constellation's second prince walked against the crowd with a drooping expression, straight towards King Nuven. Chapter 154 The Secret of Triumph. Everyone left the meeting hall. There were only two silhouettes left, one larger than the other. They sat side by side on a set of stairs at one side of the hall. Thales felt slightly anxious. What is this old man's intention of asking me to stay here? It can't really be that he just wants to have a drink, can it? Despite the thick cotton cloak over his shoulders, King Nuven showed off the clear outline of his muscles under the cloak, although his skin was already wrinkled. With a sour expression, he glared at the bandages on his body and raised his wine goblet. I'm getting old. King Nuven took a swig of wine and flexed his left arm with a pained expression. In the past, I could last through a battle of this intensity for a day and a night, but now. The old king snorted coldly and drank the rest of the wine. Thales did not say anything. He was trying hard to calm his breathing. It was not that he had never spent time alone with a kingdom's ruler. In truth, his father in name, Constellation's King Kessel gave him even more pressure while he was alone with him. However, Thales felt somehow uncomfortable sitting next to King Nuven, especially when that scent, a combination of medicine and blood, can be detected. Perhaps it was because King Nuven just killed someone with his own hands, or that the old king was unpredictable, since he had already lost all his blood relatives and lived a solitary existence. It might also be because. Your plan is very risky. Thales' train of thought was interrupted. King Nuven filled up another goblet of wine from the wine barrel. With his old voice, he slowly said, if the culprit if Pofred was here and faced this sort of situation, he would still remain calm and would not show any reaction. What would you have done then? Thales exhaled. What now? There is still a way. The Prince of Constellation tried his best to curve his lips into a warm smile. You will need to make an announcement for the archdukes that you intend to bring them along and speak to Chapman Lampard frankly and sincerely, and that you intend to bury the hatchet with him. I believe the culprit would be unwilling to do this. He knows that when you and Lampard consolidate the information both of you have, it will be enough to force him into a corner. King Nuven swiveled the wine goblet in his hand and listened to him quietly. Of course, there was never any need for us to take this risk. We can surely lay down a trap slowly and provide these two pieces of information bit by bit to the other archdukes. Thales shrugged, but we have no choice. Marquis Shiles Bamra told me that there are two archdukes who will leave in the morning. We only have one night left, and we must think of a plan to be used during the feast. At this moment, King Nuven suddenly chortled loudly. He continued laughing for a good few seconds. The king's cryptic laughter shocked Thales and made him swallow his words. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. It can't be. Wait, do not tell me that. Thales' expression was one of disbelief. He stared at King Nuven with a mixture of surprise and dissatisfaction. King Nuven tilted his head and watched Thales with a contemplative expression. His dark green eyes hid an emotionless and cold gaze, sending a chill down Thales' spine. Thales understood. None of the archdukes are leaving, are they? Thales shut his eyes and heaved a long sigh of indignation. That was false information that you deliberately fed us. As esteemed archdukes, they wouldn't just rush here to look at me and then leave. Some well-timed prompts. King Nuven nodded nonchalantly. It looks like they were very effective. Well-timed prompts, very effective. Thales recalled the dread, anxiety, and confusion he went through earlier today, and suppressed his desire to be snide with the king. He composed himself. After all, in Heroic Spirit Palace, the Prince of Constellation is only a guest with barely any power in the palace. But I must say that, you did well. King Nuven put down his wine goblet and gazed steadily at Thales. The emotion in his eyes was complicated. Thales froze slightly. Thales turned his head away and snorted softly. Thank you, but, Poutre, my vice diplomat and mentor, was the one who thought of the plan. He reminded me that I can use Lampard as a bargaining chip, too. And yet, you are the one who carried it out. King Nuven interrupted Thales. His gaze was sharp. You deserve this praise. It is an absolute miracle for someone your age to have this kind of ability. Thales flashed a fake and unpleasant smile. He did not want to appear like a monster either. This world forced him to. Perhaps the Jadestar royal family is truly filled with these types of genii. King Nuven heaved a long sigh. Thales' gaze flickered. Genii in the Jadestar royal family? Thales asked sharply, who else? King Nuven chuckled softly. His expression was one of nostalgia. Your father's brother and your grandfather's eldest son, Midir Jadestar, the old king said flatly. He was also a precocious genius. Thales' eyes brightened. Midir Jadestar. Thales recalled Gilbert and Madame Gines' attitudes towards the late king's eldest son, the sagacious prince whom everyone sang their praises for. But at the same time, he recalled what the despaired Duke of the Northern Territory, Arund, had said about Midir in Renaissance Palace. Pessimistic eldest brother. When he was 13, he came here to present his letter of credence to mediate the dispute regarding the hunting range within the pine forests. The dispute was between our kingdom's Prestige Orchid region and Black Sand region, and your kingdom's Overwatch city. That was a year before I was crowned. It was also in this hall where he met my father, the Archduke of Prestige Orchid and the Archduke of Black Sand. King Nuven looked up and down at the Hall of Heroes which glimmered in the firelight. He said slowly, I watched as poor old Olsius, the previous Archduke of Prestige Orchid, was rendered speechless by a child in front of everyone. I see. Thales nodded in embarrassment. No wonder Olsius, that man with the full beard, detested me on sight. Looks like our feud has indeed lasted for generations. True, I reckon that my father's death 1 year after that was also partly thanks to Midir. King Nuven smiled. Thales felt awkward and did not reply. The old king tightened his robe again. His gaze was incomprehensible. Did you know that in the past, I would have detested strange, supposed genii like you, especially since you are the first in line, no, the only one in line for the throne of Constellation. Thales furrowed his brow slightly. King Nuven's gaze made him a little uneasy. Midir's death was such a pity, I have always wondered what sort of king he would have been. King Nuven sighed and turned to stare at Thales. However, it is still possible for you, and that possibility is quite large. I believe that the moment you are crowned, Constellation will be reborn. King Nuven's gaze then turned fierce. Exted will have to meet a fearsome opponent. Thales had just become relaxed when his anxiety flared once more. He shuddered violently. It can't be. What is this? What is this man trying to do? He could not really gauge King Nuven's intentions. While he endured King Nuven's gaze, Thales tried his best to regulate his increasingly rapid breathing. King Nuven suddenly emitted a strange laugh. He spoke flatly, his tone filled with the kind of authority exclusive to kings. You don't have to be so anxious. I am not a man-eating beast. Thales suppressed the desire to object and forced a smile. He glanced at the center of the hall through the corner of his eyes, that was where Pofret's neck was twisted earlier. King Nuven noticed Thales' gaze and could not help but burst out laughing. As an heir to the throne, you must see blood sooner or later. The king took a swig of wine. His gaze was sharp. This will be helpful for you. Thales frowned. See blood. Thales recalled Quide's gaze before he died, and how it felt when his dagger pierced through blood and flesh. He also recalled the young psionic assassin who could produce a shrill magical sound, and his wet, warm, pulsating heart. Thales felt a surge of discomfort which he then forcefully suppressed. King Nuven put his wine goblet down and asked slowly, do you have any thoughts on the duel just now? It was memorable, the anxious Thales replied honestly, especially how an aging veteran had managed to take down a young and strong rookie. King Nuven gave a snort of laughter. Thales chose his words carefully, and the Northland's heroic custom when it comes to duels was also an eye-opener for me. Of course, there is also your courage to step forth firmly into the arena despite being the ruler of a kingdom. HMPH, when I launched the duel, I saw your expression. King Nuven stared at Thales with a profound gaze. You disapproved of it very much, didn't you? Thales was a little stunned. King Nuven continued staring at him intently. All right, Thales said with embarrassment as he took a deep breath, you know, considering your age, since this concerns such a large kingdom, what if there was a mishap? A few seconds later, under Thales' nervous gaze, King Nuven suddenly said something that was completely irrelevant. You know, the relationship and ties between the Walton family and the Jadastar family began a long time ago. Thales was confused. King Nuven slowly extended his right hand and flashed the black ring on his little finger. Do you know what this is? Thales furrowed his brow, then shook his head honestly. This is triumph. King Nuven smiled mysteriously. It is also one of the items that symbolize the birth of these two great families. Thales was involuntarily stupefied. Triumph. He watched as King Nuven took off the ring and turned it over for him to see its inner side. Thales squinted. A pattern was engraved on the inner ring where King Nuven was pointed at. It looked like a winged horse. This is the emblem of the Pegasus, King Nuven said flatly. It has been the emblem of the Carlos imperial family ever since the great Emperor Camelot established the empire. Thales was momentarily surprised. The Pegasus, imperial family, Carlos. Over 600 years ago, when Exted and Constellation were first established, due to King Tormund's brutal tactics on the remaining nobles of the ancient empire when expanding the territory his kingdom, a conflict erupted between Exted and Constellation for the first time. King Nuven's tone was profound and distant. Thales recalled something. Tormund's brutal tactics. Rikaru and Tormund, the king of dragon knights and the king of Renaissance, a Northlander and a citizen of the empire, led their elite soldiers, who had survived the Battle of Eradication, and met at the periphery of Cold Castle. In the end, the late kings both took a step back. They concluded and signed the very first contract made between these two kingdoms and agreed that they will rule the north and the south respectively without hindering each other's expansion plans. That was the first time Exted and Constellation came into contact. King Nuven exhaled a breath. Thales narrowed his eyes. He recalled what he saw and heard in the library last evening. King Nuvan was probably talking about the contract that had Tormund and Raikuru's signatures on it. If I'm not mistaken, Year 11, Calendar of Eradication, Raikuru and Tormund, Exted Constellation Border Treaty. That should be the one. What the history books did not record was that the two late kings exchanged a family heirloom in private as a pledge of their alliance. King Nuvan put on the ring again. This ring is the heirloom that King Tormund gave to King Raikuru. King Nuvan sucked in a breath and said to Thales. Raikuru then passed it to his nephew in the Walton family. The ring had always belonged to all the former Archduke Waltons as a symbol of their archdukedom and was passed down from generation to generation. None of the outsiders know about its origin and history, just like how it did not use to have a name. However, all the former archdukes called it Triumph. The king's tone was a little airy, and there was a faraway look in his eyes. Triumph. Thales creased his brow slightly. It's a good name, he said carefully. It sounds uplifting and inspiring. Uplifting and inspiring. King Nuvan could not help but laugh. King Nuvan stroked his finger over Triumph as he said with a sharp gaze, like I said, it used to be the family heirloom of the king of Renaissance, Tormund. It originated from the final empire's first emperor who is also one of your ancestors. Kessel Carlos VI. Thales' gaze flickered. Kessel, an emperor with the same name as my father. King Nuvan raised his eyes. Once belonging to the famed Emperor Kessel VI, the ring was eventually handed down to King Tormund. Tormund then gave it to Raikuru as a proof to their alliance. Kessel VI's reputation wasn't very good. His life was neither long nor short, but tempestuous. During his time, countless opponents had fallen under his conspiracy and manipulation. King Nuvan inhaled a breath, his tone was solemn. His greatest feat was relaunching the Carlos imperial family's prestige amid the chaos that followed the collapse of the ancient empire. He recaptured the capital of Triumph from the hands of rebel armies and vassals. That was how the final empire, which lasted 300 years, was established. Thales nodded. The emperor who recaptured the capital of Triumph. The founder of the final empire. I see, that's why it's called Triumph. Do you know what that emperor's nickname is? King Nuvan suddenly raised his head and looked at Thales with a pondering gaze. Thales froze a little, then shook his head. King Nuvan's expression as he stared at Thales became more and more indecipherable and made the latter extremely anxious. This tiny ring has many uses. King Nuvan sighed and rotated the ring slowly. This time, Thales was utterly dumbfounded. Has many uses. Thales stared at the ring in a daze. A horrifying thought crept into his mind. As expected, what King Nuvan said next sent a chill down his spine. The ring can conceal within it 3 different types of poisonous foam, 2 different types of gas, and even a poisonous needle. Conceal, a poisonous needle. Listening to the old king's words, Thales almost forgot to breathe. But King Nuvan continued to speak. Let's say, when 2 people in a duel are locked in a stalemate. Thales trembled violently. Slowly rotate the gear, and, Triumph, can release the prepared poisonous gas, sear grass, at close range. At this moment, King Nuvan's gaze turned very cold. His tone was also extremely terrifying. It is very expensive to extract and purify, but it can unknowingly anesthetize the victim's muscles and consciousness. This type of poison will spread to your blood under rigorous exercise. The victim will experience a lack of energy and numbness in the muscles, in addition to feeling increasingly violent and restless. Decreased energy, numbed muscles, violent and restless, the second prince was dumbstruck. He turned and stared at King Nuvan in disbelief. King Nuvan also turned his head to stare at Thales. Then, the old king confirmed Thales' frightful guess with a suspicious smile. Why so surprised? The common elected king of Extit, the most esteemed ruler among the Northlanders, Nuvan Walton VII, stared at Thales with a profound gaze. Did you really think that an old man who is almost 70 years old, could easily defeat a man in his prime, at the peak of physical reaction, strength and speed, and whom received Northland martial arts training all year long? Thales stared at King Nuvan in shock and the king cast him a meaningful smile. Thales' thoughts were a mess. He replayed every scene during the recent duel in his mind and captured the fragments that best matched the description. Pofret's heavy panting, how he could not aim accurately with his axe most of the time. And how hysteric the young archduke was at the end. It can't be. Thales did not know what expression he should be wearing right now, nor did he know what expression he had on. He could only gaze at King Nuvan closely. Did I forget to tell you? The nickname of the founder of the final empire, Kessel VI was. King Nuvan smiled, his expression mysterious. He softly uttered 3 words. The Emperor of Poison. Chapter 155. A bargaining chip you cannot refuse. Thales stared at the black ring with an unpleasant expression. The Emperor of Poisons, Triumph. He did not know what to feel about this. That battle filled with so many changes with a twist at the end, and which could be said to be the battle that affects the fate of 2 countries actually. A few seconds later, he said with some difficulty, so, is this how you triumphed in the duel? King Nuvan smiled slightly, his eyes showing a hint of sly pleasure. You're right, after all, it concerns such a large kingdom. What if there was an accident? He repeated what Thales had said a while ago. Thales' mind was a mess. The elderly yet heroic and brave image of Nuven VII that Thales had in his heart from the duel just now was completely shattered. It was replaced by the image of a shrewd and crafty old king, rotating his ring beneath the long table. King Nuven said meaningfully, "Remember, young Thales, a king must never be hot-headed and replace rationality with impulse. You must not take gambles that you are not confident of winning just for the satisfaction of it. You are not only yourself, but also your entire kingdom." Thales paid no heed to Nuven's words. At this moment, his mind spun rapidly. Thales only managed to recover from the shock after quite a while. He tried his best to grasp some clues from his chaotic thoughts. Based on his understanding of Northland, the moment this secret is leaked, King Nuven would become a target of millions of people's rebukes. It would be enough to destroy the Walton family's reputation, end the rule of Dragon Cloud City, and even jeopardize the dignity of Exted and the Northlanders. But Thales turned his head and looked at King Nuven, who did not say anything and wore a complicated expression. He said in an unconvinced manner, "Why are you telling me this? Isn't this a secret that should be kept away forever and taken to the grave? Do you know how serious this secret is?" Thales felt his heartbeat speed up and unknowingly clenched his fist softly. However, King Nuven only watched Thales calmly and flashed a pleasant smile. He did not show the type of solemnity and unease one does when someone else finds out about their weakness. "Of course," King Nuven chuckled softly and nonchalantly said, "this is most shameful to the way of the Northlanders. It is also disrespectful to the gods and contemptuous to the archdukes. Even the lowliest Northlander would despise their once beloved king for this. Once a new king is crowned, he can even take this as a reason to banish the Walton family from the ranks of the archdukes forever." Once he finished talking, King Nuven narrowed his eyes slightly and stared at Thales with a profound expression. "However, you now know this secret, don't you?" the king said in a playful tone. Thales frowned. He felt increasingly puzzled and anxious as he endured King Nuven's gaze. "Your Majesty, what exactly are you trying to do?" At that moment, Thales felt that the old man in front of him was like a pitch-black, bottomless whirlpool, while he himself was like a small boat in that whirlpool. A few seconds later, "This is a show of good faith," the old king said flatly. "Good faith," Thales repeated, puzzled. King Nuven scooped up a goblet of wine and calmly took a gulp. "I gave you an opportunity." King Nuven's expression was calm and his tone was composed. "With this, you can destroy the Walton family beyond redemption at any time." "What do you mean?" Thales felt even more confused. Right at this moment, King Nuven changed the topic again. "Before this, you seem to have mentioned to Nicholas that, after you cooperate with me to find out who the culprit is, you want to receive some benefit from me." King Nuven paid no heed to Thales' expression and he spoke softly. Thales creased his brow a little and gritted his teeth lightly. With some difficulty, Thales answered the question with another question. "Is this your so-called benefit?" "Of course not. How can this qualify as a benefit?" King Nuven could not help but laugh. He said, "This will only make you very anxious, especially since you are still in Dragon Cloud City, which is my territory. You will constantly worry about your safety because of this secret." Thales took a deep breath. His tongue felt dry. He felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. "The Dragon Spear family is never stingy." King Nuven stopped smiling. His words sent a chill down Thales' spine. "So, after seeing it yesterday evening, are you satisfied with your reward?" Thales' head shot up. "Yesterday evening?" Thales' brow was deeply furrowed. "Yes." King Nuven stared at him with a deep look. "Yesterday evening." Thales' expression changed. "Yesterday evening." After he exited the Hall of Heroes, he got lost in Heroic Spirit Palace, and then... Under Thales' disbelieving gaze, the old king ran his fingers over his ring and said slowly, "Why, did you think that I would let a foreign prince who just arrived, wander freely without restrictions in my palace? And even coincidentally wander into Rakeru's library?" King Nuven glanced at Thales from the corner of his eyes. A bright light flickered in his eyes. Thales' heart pounded. He stood frozen to his spot. "Merc deliberately led you there," King Nuven said calmly. "So you have met my granddaughter now, Thales." Then, Thales sat dazedly on the step as the calm and composed King Nuven spoke slowly. "Your future wife, and queen." The hall was silent once more. Thales was motionless where he stood. The scene in the library appeared in his mind. That willful and unreasonable little princess, Alex Walton, who beat and scolded her servant as she pleased. But an even more memorable figure appeared afterwards, the unkempt girl with the black-rimmed spectacles, a face full of dust, and who lay face down on the floor reading a book. "Little rascal." King Nuven said no more. He calmly took another gulp of wine. Thales took an entire minute to straighten out the situation at hand. Thales' breathing grew rapid and he raised his head. "Why, what is going on? What do you mean?" King Nuven softly inhaled a breath, then raised his head to look at the fireplace on the other side of the hall. He then looked at the shelf above the fireplace, at the ferocious weapon that was passed down from Raikeru the hero to the Walton family. The Soul Slayer pike. Among all the lies you told Olsius and the other archdukes, at least one was correct. King Nuven's eyes burned with an unknown emotion. He turned his head and fixed his sharp gaze on Thales with a determined expression. For the continuation of the Walton family, I must put my stakes on a powerful person, a future king. Thales' face was pale and he dug his fingernails deeper and deeper into his palms. He suddenly understood something. King Nuven did not say anything, he was waiting for Thales' response. After a while, Thales only said quietly, the Walton family is facing demise. You want to ensure the continuation of the Dragon Spear family by uniting it, through marriage, with Constellation's Jadestar royal family. You want me to marry your granddaughter. Thales had raised his voice without realizing it. So that Constellation, can take over this burden. King Nuven clasped his wine goblet as he stared at the Soul Slayer pike. He snorted softly, as if in disapproval. The king's aged voice rose again. No, what I am giving all of you is an extremely rare opportunity, an opportunity you cannot refuse. Thales instantly shuddered, surprised. Think of what all of you could gain. King Nuven's gaze was profound yet ice-cold. As the blood relative of the Archduke of Dragon Cloud City's family, the royal family of Constellation would be able to meddle in Extit's internal affairs from then on. At that moment, Thales felt a chill travel down his spine. King Nuven's voice was cold and indifferent, as if he was talking about something that had nothing to do with himself. One of the descendants between you and my granddaughter will inherit the Walton surname as well as the power to become the future Archduke of Dragon Cloud City. As for you, Thales Jadestar, you will be able to do something the Oathkeeper Midir IV and Chara the Hero could not do even if they combined their powers. You will become the Supreme King of Constellation, and also the first regent of Dragon Cloud City in the Kingdom of Extit. King Nuven's expression did not change as he said words that caused Thales to feel utterly upset. Thales stared at King Nuven in a trance. Even though he possessed memories that were completely different from those of everyone else in this world, even though his mind was working frantically, Thales was unable to react at once to this information. King Nuven's expression became unprecedentedly solemn. And before this, if all of you want to hold on to the Walton family as a bargaining chip, and desire to control Extit through Dragon Cloud City. Thales exhaled in disappointment and finished King Nuven's sentence. Constellation and I will have to do our best to ensure the Walton family's dominion and status in Dragon Cloud City, and protect the Dragon Spear family from withering away in Extit, correct? King Nuven showed a satisfied smile. If the future king plans to use reasons like the lack of a male heir, to strip the Walton family of their rights, he would have to think twice. King Nuven continued to speak. He would have to take into account the attitude of the Western Peninsula's shield to the south, because it's your cheese that he would be moving. King Nuven put on a determined expression. What you need to do now is to draw attention to Constellation's presence and retain the Walton family's rule, even if there's only one girl left in the house and even if the other archdukes are against her. Then, you will be able to obtain the greatest chip and advantage when you are against Extit. At the same time, this can also strengthen the Jadestar royal family's influence and status in Constellation, raising its prestige, considering the current situation. Thales suddenly recalled his conversation with Gilbert when he first arrived in Mindy's hall. At that time, Gilbert had schemed and set up an alliance between Thales and Serena Corleone. Thales subconsciously repeated Gilbert's words in a low voice. Obtaining allies by binding them to you using benefits, is the essence of politics. I can still live for 8 or 9 years. By then, Constellation should have begun to recover. King Nuven nodded in praise. After that, the final direct descendant of the Walton family, my granddaughter and your wife, I entrust her for you to protect. Thales stayed silent for a long time. United in matrimony, Constellation and Extit, Jadestar and Walton. What if I said, no? He raised his head coldly and stared at King Nuven. What if I don't want to be dragged into this dangerous mess? Those who dance with the dragon often have their lives hanging by a thread, said the second prince flatly. Besides, until now, those who wanted to form an alliance with me either caused me a lot of harm, or were horribly harmed by me. And, Thales recalled what Zion Covendier told him before he departed for the north. If you share a boat with a jackal and a wolf, you will run the risk of having your boat overturned. King Nuven stared at him. There was a strange emotion in the king's green eyes that was difficult to distinguish. Thales stared back at the king without showing any signs of weakness. Finally, the old king nodded slowly. This has nothing to do with your wishes. A messenger crow carrying my warrant will fly to Eternal Star City tomorrow. Your father will be the one making the decision. Thales could not help but tremble. Thales clenched his teeth and asked in a hoarse voice, what if my father, too, does not agree? What if he does not want to bring Constellation into this mess? Oh well, replied the old king nonchalantly, I told you the secret of triumph, didn't I? Thales' pupils constricted. He stared at King Nuven, dazed. This is leverage Constellation can use anytime to destroy the Walton family. This is enough to gain his trust, King Nuven said slowly in his old yet firm voice. When you find treasure, you might be apprehensive about it being a trap and give it up. However, if you possess the power to destroy it at the same time, would you still give it up because of your fears? Thales was speechless for a moment. In the face of such an Extachian king in such a situation, as clever as he was in dealing with people, he, too, felt that he could not handle the situation. His intuition also told him that King Kessel would definitely agree to such an alliance. Thales took a deep breath and picked up from where the old king had left off. However, with your death, the effectiveness of triumph as a bargaining chip will slowly fade. Then using triumph as leverage will yield fewer and fewer benefits. In comparison, Kessel, my father, will prefer the benefits that come with a marriage, so he would be more inclined to provide support and guarantee the Walton family's status. Holding leverage over the kingdom of the Great Dragon, turning the tables for Constellation, which has been declining since the Bloody Year. King Nuven raised his eyebrows. He scooped up another goblet of wine and drank it. I reckon that the nobles in Extit would not be happy, Thales said dejectedly. Including all the archdukes. Of course not, every single one of them cannot wait to see the decline of the Walton family. King Nuven's eyes had a bright twinkle. He put down the wine goblet and wiped his lips. However, I am the king of Extit, and I will remove the final obstacle from our cooperation, said King Nuven calmly. The men in Dragon Cloud City who have reached the age of enlistment will not be quiet for the next few years. Getting rid of Lampod is only the beginning. Thales suddenly realized it, from Nicholas's probing to the so-called test the king gave him. So, you have planned everything from the beginning. Having said this, Thales sighed. Don't put me on the same level as those shameful, scheming scums who only care about profits. King Nuven snorted softly in dissatisfaction. This is not a conspiracy but, in the words of the Far Easterners, an overt strategy. A bargaining chip you can't refuse. Yes, Thales lowered his head. He felt an unspeakable sense of loss. Things like plans, conspiracies, and overt strategies, you are all good at these. Like the first time he saw King Kessel in Mindy's hall, Thales felt that resignation and helplessness at having his fate and choices firmly controlled by others. That helpless feeling of being carried along with the tide and drifting with the wind. King Nuven watched him quietly. After a long time, under the light of the fire, the old king said slowly, "You are a special child, Thales." King Nuven sighed. It was obvious from his voice that he was worn down by the vicissitudes of life. I can feel that you are sharp and firm like Soria, and, at the same time, unrealistic like Mariah. Sharp and firm, unrealistic. HMPH, thank you for your praise, Thales replied tiredly. He even chuckled. I reckon that you think I am more of the latter. Talking about his two late sons, King Nuven gently breathed in a mouthful of air and exhaled it slowly. You are not weak, Thales, even though you are still young, the old king said earnestly. From what I have seen, and from what Nicholas and the others reported about you, you are a survivalist, and you have all the qualities needed to become a powerful man. But what you need is time, training, and a heart that is firm, callous, and unyielding. King Nuven clenched his fist and tapped his chest at the spot right above his heart. A firm, callous, and unyielding heart. Thales furrowed his brow, not able to take it any more. He asked, aren't you tired? Things like the royal court, the kingdom, the archdukes, conspiracies, plans, assassinations, God knows what else is waiting for you. Since his escape from Red Street Market, up to now, the Mystics, Blood Bottle Gang, the Blood Clan, the Iris Flowers, the Black Prophet, the 6 great clans, Extit. He had to face ill intentions, dangers, and tiring conspiracies as well as schemes time and again. Even though Thales braved through them over and over, he felt as though he was reaching his limit. This life made Thales mentally and physically exhausted. Even his life as a child beggar in the abandoned houses did not give him this sort of feeling, of having a difficult road ahead. I reckon that, at this, Thales hesitated for a moment, but he blurted it out. If Prince Mariah was really the kind of person Pofret spoke about, he probably felt tired, too. King Nuven's expression slowly stiffened. There were deep emotions in his eyes. There was a few seconds of silence. Finally, King Nuven said slowly, it is normal for you to feel tired. Everyone gets tired. However, for people like us, when we feel tired and want to stop, or even give up, we will feel pain. The king pressed down on his injured shoulder and panted heavily from the pain. Whether it is the pain of being caught in the current and losing autonomy over your own life, or the pain your enemies inflict on you when they see that you are weak. King Nuven pursed his lips, as if recalling something. That sort of pain which etches deep into your bones will push you back to many battlefields. You will get sick and tired of them, until you are used to this endless cycle of pain and fatigue. These are the burdens we were born to bear. It is not just us. The old king showed no emotions as he continued to speak. Before becoming an archduke, Olsius was poisoned twice by his stepbrother. Trendita married a boorish woman from the Yamamu tribe so that he could develop a piece of wasteland from the Sighing Mountains for the barren Reformation Tower. The bald old Leko was forced to marry off his youngest daughter to Camus Union for the sake of the economy. In the end, his daughter died there, tragically. The day Rockney became an archduke, he made a personal order to have 6 arrogant and domineering counts and viscounts executed. They were the people Rockney's father trusted the most. On the other hand, Lampod is a heartless creature who thrust his sword into his elder brother's heart in front of everyone to seize the position of archduke. However, they all rose again and again from within the pain and weariness. Was it the same for you, rising up again from the pain and weariness? Thales lowered his gaze. Like your son. King Nuven did not say anything for a full 10 seconds. After a momentary silence, King Nuven raised his head and stared at the Soul Slayer pike, which had an awe-inspiring reputation. Did you know about Soria, my eldest son, who was the most likely to inherit this position? He died 12 years ago. Thales stared at him blankly. Miss Alex's father. With hesitation, he carefully asked, I heard from Lord Merc that he died in a hunting accident. No, this time, King Nuven swiftly interrupted the second prince. His face was ashen. The accident is only something we tell outsiders. Thales creased his brow a little and held his breath once more. He was assassinated while he was hunting, the old king said in an ordinary manner. To be more precise, the assassin came from Constellation. When he heard this, Thales trembled violently. Chapter 156 Horrifying. The second prince of Constellation looked at the old king with surprise. Nonetheless, I'm here now. King Nuven turned around to look at him. His tone was calm, yet his eyes were complex. Bear the entire future of your family on your shoulders as Constellation's prince. Thales suppressed his nervousness and heaved a long sigh. With a bleak expression on his face, he said, My two sons, their fate, or should I say their misfortune, have been strikingly similar. Yet, I have to stand here, tinkering with my bargaining chips to win a future for the Waltons. Upon hearing King Nuven's words, Thales shook his head quietly. The nobles and rulers are a different kind of animal. They breathe power, that is what Poutre told me. So, you better get used to it as soon as possible for your own good. King Nuven kept his bleak expression to reveal a tough but cold face. Thales closed his eyes lightly. King Nuven's expression changed. He squinted and looked at Thales in a mysterious manner. Speaking of which, they didn't tell you, did they? The old king clasped his hands. The truth, about that, bloody ear, of yours. Thales opened his eyes in surprise and stared at King Nuven. What he recalled from his memories was firstly, the hysterics of Queen Kia, followed by the names, Charlton and Shadow Shield. Then finally there was the Jadestar family tomb in Renaissance Palace. The second prince slowly shook his head. They didn't say much. King Nuven snorted lightly. In that case, maybe I shouldn't say too much. King Nuven turned his head. It is best not to intervene with the education of the Jadestar family. You've actually interfered quite a lot, Thales retorted sarcastically in his heart. But the Extant Kingdom, these invaders from the north were a direct participant of the Bloody Year. Thales secretly thought, maybe he knows something. Do you have any special news for me, your majesty? Thales cautiously utilized honorifics and shrugged. If you really see me as your future grandson-in-law. Upon hearing his title and choice of words, King Nuven revealed a thought-provoking look, following which he laughed. See, the old king winked at him, you adapt very quickly. Thales responded with an ugly smile. You will understand the rest from your instructors, from Constellation and from your father. King Nuven stretched his elbow out with a subtly mysterious expression on his face. But I can tell you one thing, is one of the pawns attached to the allies. Even your kingdom's secret intelligence department doesn't know about this. Thales' expression changed. Even the secret intelligence department doesn't know. His breathing accelerated. Who do you think would assign such a murderer to the Jadestar royal family? King Nuven smiled mysteriously. The real mastermind. Doubt began to surface in Thales' heart. The real mastermind. That mysterious organization of assassins, and also, Shadow Shield, which Pofred mentioned before. Gilbert gave him a rough idea once, but he only told him that King Kessel V had already avenged whatever he could. Thales slowly shook his head. The reasoning is simple, so simple in fact, you would not believe it. King Nuven looked at him intently. Members of the Jadestar royal family suffered strategized assassinations almost simultaneously. There was only one exception. I'm not sure about the other cases, but if his plan had gone smoothly, it would seem like he was the only one who benefited from the Bloody Year. King Nuven said with a strange tone. Member of Jadestar royal family, one exception. Thales' heart skipped a beat, but he recovered immediately. You're not the first person to accuse my father in my face in an attempt to drive a wedge between us. Thales snorted. King Nuven continued to lock his eyes on him. Bizarre colors seemed to dance in his eyes. His stare raised terror in Thales' heart. Think about it, future guardian of Dragon Cloud City. A few seconds passed as King Nuven satirized him. I don't mean your father. Thales frowned as he snorted. Then, who are you accusing? 12 years ago, all the Jadestars were. Suddenly, a shudder ran through Thales' body. He was stunned. Wait. Kessel aside, there was indeed one Jadestar. Who did not die from political murder? A Jadestar who was not assassinated. Thales recalled Gilbert's words. In the tragic event of the Bloody Year, there was only one prince whose death was not by assassination. It can't be. Thales felt his heartbeat accelerate. A shade of white akin to the dead cast itself over his face. He looked at King Nuven in disbelief. 12 years ago, after we broke through Broken Dragon Fortress, we captured Rudolf Nanchester, King Neuven said silently, emphasizing the triumph. Rudolf Nanchester. Relevant information regarding this name began to surface in Thales' mind. He was the Duke of the Land of Cliffs region at that time. King Neuven caressed his own ring and plainly said, that man was strong-willed, but the Northlanders despised his refusal to send troops, a cowardly act of watching Prince Horus's destruction. Thales recalled his conversation with Poutre at Raymond Pass as they paid homage to the former second prince, Horus Jadastar. The former Duke of the Land of Cliffs region, one of the directors of Broken Dragon Fortress and the one who watched the destruction of the second prince was also the one-eyed dragon, Duke Koster Nanchester's older brother. According to Poutre's theory, he was held captive by Exted and he later died in prison. We threw him in the dungeon and forgot about him. We waited for the arrival of spring and continued south towards the Constellatiate hinterland. Sure enough, King Neuven's narrative was similar to that of Poutre's. And then the king followed up with, but when news of the Jadastar royal family's assassination arrived, the half-dead Rudolf struggled to meet me. King Neuven's expression grew heavier. In the fortress, he told me an unexpected secret while he cried. Thales clenched his fist as he silently listened to the king's narrative. Back in the day when Rudolf and Horus jointly guarded Broken Dragon Fortress, your Duke of the Land of Cliffs region realized something that made him so uneasy, he was unable to eat or sleep. King Neuven's gaze grew sharper. Horus Jadastar, the second prince of the Constellation Kingdom, your pride and joy, the sword of reversing light. He once secretly recruited, organized and trained a special squad of mercenaries from various countries as well as regions. Mainly because outside the establishment of the kingdom's guards and Jadastar private army, Prince Horus had always loved making friends with many elites and brave men. Over the years, Constellation did not manage to detect it until the day Horus officially utilized that squad, King Neuven said. Rudolf then noticed some clues. Thales could not help but get nervous. Rudolf noticed that within that year, the squad was entrusted with a mission. King Neuven's tone sounded indifferent as he spoke each word. They were to stealthily sneak in, then hide, then infiltrate, and eventually invade a fortress whose structure was the most enclosed, whose guards had the tightest patrol system, whose defenses were the tightest, and who was famed to be the fortress that was the most impossible to break through. Huh, Thales voiced out astoundedly. Fortress. The doubts in his heart grew stronger. When Horus led his troops out to attack and harass our supply line, the skeptical Rudolf Nanchester discovered many things in Prince Horus's bedroom. King Neuven nodded with his brows deeply furrowed. He found everything from coded letters to secret account books. King Neuven pulled his robe over and took a thick, folded piece of paper out from its inner pocket. In a cold manner, he said, and also this little thing. Thales looked at King Neuven in amazement. You, were prepared. King Neuven did not say a word but shook the folded piece of paper in his hands. Thales took a deep breath and suppressed his trembling hand. He took the folded piece of paper, spreading it open. The paper was made out of a good material. It was smooth, yet solid to the touch. It seemed like it could be preserved for a long time. It was 2 meters wide, so Thales had to lay it on the ground and spread it open with his arms to be able to read it. There was an illustration of a map on the paper. It was the map of a square building with its top and side views. Thales could immediately see that the map was very intricate. Different colors and indications were used to clearly label the white walls, ubiquitous sentry towers, terrifying crossbows that defend the city, a few narrow entry points as well as all the important entrances, exit passages and rooms of the building. Thales' pupils immediately contracted. This, could it be? With a face full of terror, Thales brought the map close to his face. He stared intently at every inch and did not leave a single detail behind. The map was also marked with densely packed numbers, figures, and arrows from the building's front door to its interior. In disbelief, he read the words on it. Change of guards, number of guards, secret hiding spots, functional entry points, patrolling hours of the front and back doors, evacuation routes. Thales was dumbfounded. No. This cannot be. A few minutes later, the second prince of Constellation gently got up. The astonishment and shock on his face had yet to dissipate. King Neuven took in the look on his face. In view of our ongoing war with Constellation, I kept this a secret. I took Rudolf into custody at Dragon Cloud City until he died in prison. King Neuven, who had just revealed a frightening secret, heaved a sigh. You can use this information as a bargaining chip. Use it when necessary, King Neuven whispered. A coward who was constantly reviled, the Duke of the Land of Cliffs region who did not provide relief during trying times was misunderstood for way too long. From the beginning till the end, Rudolf Nanchester was the one truly loyal to 82nd. Thales rolled the map up as his frown became even tighter. Horus Jadastar. Mercenary squad. Rudolf Nanchester. How could this be? Even your father is most probably unaware of this piece of information. King Neuven sighed. In a sense, we Extichans eliminated the murderers for you. You may want to send your thanks to Nicholas. Thales breathed irregularly as he recalled the Jadastar family tomb in Renaissance Palace, 82nd's big stone urn and the little ones on its side. It took a while for him to snap out from his bewilderment. I don't think you could have forged this map, Thales said absent-mindedly. What do you think? King Nuven said in disdain. He chased his words by draining his goblet in one gulp. Who exactly were those people in the mercenary squad set up by Horus? Thales lifted his head and murmured. I don't know. Rudolph did not elaborate. King Nuven stared at his empty goblet. He only mentioned that the mercenary leader was peculiar. He carried a strange sword. Thales sat expressionlessly on the steps as he subconsciously gasped. He could hardly speak because he was horrified by this secret. Why would he do such a thing? The second prince blurted without realizing. I think he had his own reasons. King Nuven gently shook his head, his eyes filled with languish. And they were good reasons. What do you mean, his own reasons? Thales looked up. You will find out in time. Your father will tell you about the cause of the bloody year, King Nuven sneered. However, Thales felt like the sneer contained more sorrow than ridicule. The Jadastar tragedy. Thales frowned and gradually clenched his fist. A few seconds later, he slowly released it. Thales hung his head and sighed. He bitterly handed back the paper to King Nuven. You keep it, this little thing is way too ominous. The Extachian king shook his head and pushed it back. And after all, it's the map of your Renaissance palace. Ellipsis. Dragon Cloud City, 4:30 at dawn. Under the pitch-black night sky, in a shop by West Express Avenue. Let's just say that the doctor you're looking for is really in Heroic Spirit Palace. God knows how you're going to sneak in, beneath the weak light of an everlasting lamp, Gu, the meat shop owner from the Far East gloomily said to the man in front of him. But, do you understand the cost of rescuing someone from Heroic Spirit Palace? The man before him just kept his head down. There was a strangely shaped, fully black sword on his lap and he was wiping it attentively, in an almost nitpicky way. Gu exhaled. With his Northlandic retroflex take on the common language, he patiently emphasized, you will have to crawl up the slope the whole way, avoid the disciplinary officer on night duty as well as the patrols on the main street, cut through 2 private army-guarded noble districts, then cross layer after layer of towers and sentries. If you are discovered you will be attacked by crossbows or hacked to death by hundreds of people. Before that happens, rush to the gatehouse separating the city district and Heroic Spirit Palace. The man stood up and dropped the cloth he used to wipe his weapon. He raised the strange black sword and pointed it at the ceiling. Gu continued, immediately climb the 10-meter-high gatehouse. It's banquet night in Heroic Spirit Palace today. The man raised his head and squinted his eyes at his sword, as if evaluating its curvature. His uncharacteristic voice traveled into Gu's ears as he spoke. That gatehouse will open at dawn, so there won't be a need for me to climb. An opportunity like this is as good as it gets. How will you do it? Are you just going to walk into the place in full view of the palace guards inside, outside, and even above the gatehouse? Under the moonlight and flames glow, are you going to pass by the guards whose eyes are open wider than their fists? Gu tried to control his breathing, but he could not help raising his voice. Even if you break through the gatehouse, you still have to face a countless number of palace guards. They are all stringently selected aces among the local recruits, and have been personally trained by the White Blade Guard's instructor. Fierce, loyal, courageous, alert, sharp. The man hung the clean sword back on the sword belt around his waist. He then tightened the bounded weapon on his back. However, Gu was still trying to stop him. Let's assume that you don't alarm them. What happens after you sneak into Heroic Spirit Palace? You have to face the White Blade Guards and the Dragon's Imperial Guards. There may only be 200 or 300 of them dispersed across the palace, but all of them in there are veterans, rich in frontline experience. Also, there are countless transcendent experts and even supreme-class severing souls blade-wielding star killer. The man stretched his joints and turned towards the door. Gu tailed him and profoundly exclaimed, do you know what the word, veterans, means? It's not going to be as simple as participating in a battle and seeing blood. Based on Extat standards, once you wound up with one of them. The man did not listen to Gu. He put his hand on the door as a strange power surged within him. In that instant, he could see everything on the street outside, from the patrols in the distance to the nearby hounds. You want to simply walk into a heavily guarded, invulnerable palace without the help of an insider, and then drag someone out. The long-winded Gu heaved an extended sigh and massaged his forehead. You're really crazy. The man did not reply. He stood up, cast his gaze on the frowning Gu and nodded. Gu, look for a better reason the next time you want to lie to me, at least don't use the sensory mystic, he plainly said. Gu was stunned. He revealed a puzzled expression. Okay. In that moment, only Gu himself knew that stormy waves had set off in his heart. What did you say? The Far Easterner responded as though there was nothing wrong. With a face full of questions, he asked, what reason? The man patted Gu on the shoulder. Gu frowned. I don't know about the sensory mystic, but I understand you, Gu. The man revealed a rigid smile. Gu was slightly startled. You're good at hiding various emotions, but I can identify them. The man applied pressure on his black sword and shook his head lightly. The man who lives with a mask on lives with pain as well. Ji clenched his fists under his sleeves. The man then turned around, pushed the door open and said his final words. Also, send my regards to Morat, we haven't met in 12 years, I really miss him. In that instance, Ji froze. Ji stood there in a daze as he watched the man disappear through the door into the deep darkness. Just like him in the past. The next minute, the man's shadow appeared atop the roof of a low house. There was fallen snow as far as the eye could see. The man raised his head, looked towards the sky and cast his eyes upon the dark moon, which was shrouded in clouds. Then, his eyes swept past the districts of Dragon Cloud City that stretched along the mountain range. His gaze traveled across several city gatehouses, up the peak and finally locked on the magnificent palace. That's the residence of the Walton family, the great family of archdukes in Dragon Cloud City. It's also the whereabouts of the current common elected king of Exted. Heroic Spirit Palace. The man recalled Gu's words. To overcome layer upon layer of guards and sneak into a heavily guarded, invulnerable palace. He patted the black sword on his waist lightly as his lips curled up in a smile. Hiya. In this regard, the man closed his eyes. I'm already very experienced. The next moment, his shadow disappeared into the snowy terrain. Chapter 157 The Death of Soria. Exted, Dragon Cloud City, Heroic Spirit Palace. Nuven the Seventh's administrator, Lord Burn Merk was standing in the corridor outside the Hall of Heroes. He was staring into the murky, snowy sky, deeply absorbed in his thoughts. The white blade guards were on standby around him, their gazes were sharp and grim. Merk lost count of the times he stared at the falling snow in Northland throughout the 40 years of his life. The leader of the king's entourage and current head of the white blade guards, Nicholas the Starkiller, approached him from behind and stood next to him. Winter will be harsh this year, said Lord Merk without turning to look at him. I think so too, old pal. Nicholas squinted as he peered at the snow outside the window and smiled in a strange manner. Do you remember when we were still new in the White Blade Guards, those days of training in the harsh winter? Of course I do. Lord Merk, who had been working as an administrator for years, flashed him a slight smirk. Just like you now, that stone-faced Castellan trained us mercilessly, we called him, Iceberg, behind his back, even in our sleep. We prayed for him to die early or be spouseless for the rest of his life. Until the day his wife came to visit him at the camp. Nicholas guffawed. Monty was extremely shocked. Who knew Iceberg's wife could be so beautiful? The injustice. Merk stared into the distance. Right. He recalled when he first joined the White Blade Guards 20 years ago. The infamous ground shaker Commander Castellan Lampod chased the new recruits out to the field with a whip in the bitter winter. At that time, those who could make it into the White Blade Guards were mostly strongmen who had fought in the front lines. Feeling cold, the north wind and harsh winter are the greatest gift bestowed on us Northlanders by the Master of the Mountains. They make you stronger, tougher and unstoppable. That was what Castellan told them. Merk still remembered his old superior's brawny physique. It was like that of a snowland grizzly, and his frost-covered face was filled with an unwavering ferocity. Stop slacking, take off all your clothes, and start running. There's some hot water at the finishing line. If you can't make it within half an hour, you'll freeze to death. Thinking of this, Merk averted his gaze to Nicholas and asked, are you still carrying out the rite of initiation? Making the new recruits run around on the field in the bitter winter? Absolutely. We were all tormented the same way, Nicholas said, chuckling. Wouldn't it be unfair if we let the new recruits off the hook? The both of them exchanged glances, smiling. At that time, the legendary, undefeatable Castellan was still young and robust. Dominic the Blood Mace had yet to die in the White Mountain battle, and Terran the Unextinguishable Blaze, who counted the laps as they ran with an infuriating smile on his face, still carried his motionless bow with black and silver stripes in a truly pompous manner. At that time also, 3 of the future 5 war generals were gathered there. Sore Nicholas was merely a haughty, misanthropic newbie, and had not gotten the nickname, Star Killer, at the fortress. No one would believe that a little rogue like him, who was frequently targeted by bullies, would become Castellan's successor someday. No one expected that of Gia Sullian, nicknamed Spike Wind, and Prince of Guards, for he often whined about the canteen food, would make himself known in the legendary battle of the 38th century ground. Perhaps no one would have believed that the formidable Raven of Death, Nate Monty, used to be an archer from the countryside, who liked to tell dirty jokes and ogle women on the street as well as gauge the sizes of their bottoms. They were young and dauntless warriors, one prouder and more impulsive than the other. Merk still remembered, to this day, that due to Nicholas's disobedience, he was tied to a pole in front of all the new recruits. With a small piece of plank between his teeth, he groaned as Castellan beat his body into a bloody pulp using a thorny whip. Under Castellan's merciless training, they became King Nuven's most trusted weapons, the toughest of the dragon's imperial guards. They bled on the ground of glacial centuries, on the battlefield of White Mountains Valley, the maze-like Golden Passage, and the broken Dragon Fortress, leaving behind countless bodies of their comrades. They wept for their defeat, chanted war songs amid the battles, and drank themselves to oblivion to celebrate their victories. Finally, they carved their names on the platinum-coated pages of the Legend of White Blade Guards alongside the names of Northland's heroes from the ancient Empire era. Those were the days. Now, everything felt like a dream. There was also a young man with a bright grin, who kept his blue blood status a secret. He trained with them back in the day, and fought Merc for a bowl of broth. That cheeky fellow. Thinking of this, Merc could not help but smile. However, the glint of joy soon faded from his eyes and he sighed. His own daughter became 20 this day. It was then Nicholas's turn to sigh as well. It's time. Snapping back from his flashbacks, Merc kept the memories deep in his heart. He turned around and bowed slightly before the two petite figures beside him. Please come with me, Lady Alex. It's 4 in the morning. Wrapped in a thick coat, Alex Walton, a drowsy, sweet-looking girl, looked like she had been dragged out of bed a while ago. She was rubbing her eyes with one hand, and blowing hot breath into another. If there's anything to discuss, why can't we just do it tomorrow? She hissed. Seeing this, Lord Merc silently lamented. This girl is too spoiled. Her temperament is akin to that which belongs to daughters of rich merchants, or jumped-up Bulgarians. This is not good. She's still the last direct descendant of the Walton family despite being a girl. I told you, this is an order from His Majesty. Lord Merc nodded with a vacant expression. And believe me when I say what happens next is crucial to your future, Your Highness. The king's granddaughter looked away and huffed, expressing her discontent as well as frustration. Alex pulled her robe tighter around herself and glanced at the person behind her. Her girlish voice was filled with resentment. Then, why is this lowly servant here? Merc scowled. Standing behind Alex was a skinny, shabbily dressed girl. She had platinum hair and she wore a pair of black, thick-framed glasses. The poor girl was shivering in the wintry midnight wind. Hearing what her mistress said, she stepped back timidly. She's also here under His Majesty's order, Merc answered coldly. We must obey. Alex was immediately silenced. She glared at Little Rascal, who was standing behind her, and the latter threw her arms around herself pitifully. Merc nodded, escorting the girls towards the Hall of Heroes. Alex yawned and lifted her chin pridefully. Meanwhile, Little Rascal followed her mistress and kept her head down. She flinched and took a small step back when she spotted a formidable-looking member of the White Blade Guard. At that very second, Nicholas called out to Merc from behind. Burn, do you still remember the moment we raised our white blades and took an oath of allegiance before the Legend of White Blade Guards? Nicholas inhaled deeply, his gaze brimming with nostalgia. Do you recall the last few lines? Merc thought that Nicholas had been behaving somewhat oddly the entire day. He was never so sentimental on other days. He gazed at Nicholas, searching for hints in his stoic face. Of course, the training in his early days had become part of his muscle memory. Merc gave a light chuckle before his facial expression stiffened. I swear on my blood, my body, my sword, my soul, word by word, he uttered the phrase. Nicholas's eyes gleamed. He nodded, and with Merc, he recited the next line, ward off the enemies and win countless battles until we bleed out. The White Blade Guards around them each had on a stern look. Together, they placed their fists on their chests. Fend for countless lives, fear not of death till the end of humanity. Alex, who was waiting impatiently, rolled her eyes and huffed. Little Rascal, on the other hand, was excited by the sight of the grim-faced White Blade Guards. Be guardians of the future, honor your beliefs till the sun and the moon grow dim. This is the new oath of White Blade Guards, Little Rascal muttered. Year 1386 in the Empire calendar, Sarah Rund recovered the Legend of the White Blade Guards, and reassembled the renowned White Blade Guards, combining the old oath and the knighthood pledge. Shut your mouth, idiot. Alex hissed at her. You're really annoying. Little Rascal's eyes reddened and she lowered her head. Nicholas and Merc glanced at each other and chanted in unison. Leave a legacy of hope, cast the light of glory, till the world falls into an eternal slumber. They exchanged a wordless smile. Merc nodded and led the two girls into the Hall of Heroes to meet the man he respected the most. Nuven VII, who had recently fought in a duel, was sitting on the staircase in one of the corners in the hall. Seated beside the king was the envoy from Constellation, whom his fellow vassals would not stop talking about, the young and intelligent Prince Thales Jadastar. The two of them, however, were sitting side by side in silence. They did not seem to be in a good mood, as though they had just ended an unpleasant conversation. Merc ushered the two seemingly confused girls towards the king. The administrator nodded at the king, and stepped aside. Your Majesty, Lady Alex is here. Thales lifted his chin. What's going on? He gawked at the blue-eyed brunette and Little Rascal behind her, who appeared to be petrified by the situation at hand. Noticing his gaze, the preteen girl responded with a glare. Thales just frowned. So, this is my future wife. Fazed by the secret King Nuven had told him earlier, Thales looked away subconsciously and sighed. Witnessing his attitude, Alex's lips protruded in a sulky pout. What is it, Grandpa? Alex Walton, the sole remaining direct female descendant of the Archduke of Dragon Cloud City, pouted. I'm very tired, she fawned over the blank-faced king. Little Rascal was hiding behind Alex. She stuck her head out cautiously and sneaked a curious peek at the seemingly dejected Thales. That boy, what happened to him? Is he unhappy? Nuven the Seventh did not reply. With a goblet, he scooped some wine from a keg beside next to him, and took a sip. Merc, the old king's raspy voice sounded, my granddaughter will marry this boy. As a former member of the White Blade Guards and my current administrator, what should you do? Merc frowned slightly. Although it's expected, but when one hears it for real. What? Lady Alex screamed. Her teeny eyes widened larger than her gaping mouth. She scanned Thales from head to toe in disbelief. Grandpa, you're handing me over in marriage to, this. You want him to be my husband? Alex's breathing accelerated. She stared at the moping Thales, the boy whom she ran into in the library yesterday evening, the boy who chastised her in front of her servant. A wave of exasperation washed over her. He is skinny, and so much shorter than me. Alex whipped around and told her grandfather, marrying little rascal to him is more like it. Little rascal, who stood behind her paled and began to tremble. Come on, Lady Alex. Brooding, Thales had no energy or intention to maintain his relationship with a preteen girl. Without looking at her, he coldly said, marrying you is not exactly good news to me either. Alex was taken aback, but her astonishment soon turned into anger. You little. At that very moment, Merc spoke, interrupting Alex who was about to lose it. Despite the fact that Prince Thales comes from Constellation, if this is your Majesty's wish, Lord Merc lowered his head respectfully and subtly signaled for Alex to keep quiet. I will devote myself to him as I have to Lady Alex. King Nuven stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Good. The king turned to Thales and said, I believe you've met before. This is Burn Merc. Back when he was in the White Blade Guards, he was Soria's most trusted subordinate. Soria. Thales' expression changed. King Nuven's eldest son. He looked up at Merc, who also turned to him and gave him a polite nod. Fuming, Alex attempted to speak, but she was silenced by Merc's stern glare. As it seemed, Thales thought, this spoiled girl with horrible temper really listened to her father's former subordinate. So, to express my gratitude for your aid, and prove that there's no more ill feelings between us, following Northland's custom, after you take a sip of this wine, Jadastar and Walton will be allies from then on. King Nuven narrowed his eyes, lifted the wine goblet, and placed it before Thales. Thales frowned as he peered at the old king with bemusement. What is he doing? Is he reiterating my status to Alex and Merc, or the relationship between us? Is it even necessary? The Prince of Constellation pondered for a few seconds and sighed. You know, Lampod of Black Sand region did the same thing. He handed me a cup of wine and asked me to become his ally. I rejected him though. Clever decision, King Nuven said, feeling amused. How about now? Pressured by King Nuven's stare, Thales pursed his lips. Shouldn't we wait till tomorrow, after you send out your messenger crow and wait for my father's reply? Thales asked cautiously, if my father has other terms too. That will be an issue between your father and I. King Nuven's firm gaze implied his sincere determination. But you are you, Thales. I am speaking to you not as the son of Kessel Jadastar, or as the second prince of Constellation. This has nothing to do with the diplomatic marriage between you and my granddaughter, or whether Jadastar will ally with Walton. I am asking about your opinion, Thales. The old king raised the goblet and his eyes lit up. Do you wish to put the personal vendetta between us, between you and the Walton family behind? I am asking you, and only you. Thales felt a jolt. He realized that ever since he was crowned as prince, this had been the first time someone addressed him as Thales, without the history and status that came with said name. Thales looked King Nuven in the eye. At last, the Prince of Constellation sighed. Certainly. Thales received the goblet from the king, staring into the black wheat wine that filled half of the goblet. Seeing Merc's vigilant stare, Alex's sulky pout, and little rascal's curious, anxious gaze, the old king smirked. Thales closed his eye and took a small sip of the drink. He thought he knew all about alcoholic drinks in this world. The scullery in Jala's Sunset pub supplied countless brands and Thales often dug around for them. Nonetheless, when he swallowed the wine, he finally realized that no two types of alcohols were the same in this world. At least, the rye wine exclusively served to the king of Extad is. Cough, cough, cough. Thales flung the goblet onto the staircase and began to cough violently. The tangy, pungent taste of the alcohol gushed down his throat, filled his mouth, his nostrils, and his brain. In his past life, he was a guy with extremely low alcohol tolerance. Thales did not know whether his current body was better than that, but he knew one thing for sure. Rye wine was definitely not something he could take. Cough, cough. Thales' cheeks were now red and his eyes were brimming with tears. Ha ha ha, seeing that, Nuven chuckled happily. Maybe we should start with something more child-friendly. Thales felt a surge of warmth across his face. Shortly after, he eventually recomposed himself. He stared at the wine goblet with a sullen look. Then, he huffed and shook his head as he said, It's all right, Caslin told me that a child will never grow up if he doesn't drink. Merc's face twitched. Caslin. Hearing that name, King Nuven's smile froze. Little Rascal appeared as though she had heard his name before. Her eyes gleamed behind her glasses as she fixed her gaze on Thales. The king looked at Thales in an odd manner. Caslin. The old fellow who sells alcohol in Black Sand region. The taste of alcohol gradually faded from Thales' mouth and nose, after which he let out a sheepish chuckle. Have I said something wrong? Holding the king's gaze, he stuttered, I heard from Poutre that he was the head of your personal guards, the former commander of the White Blade Guards. King Nuven continued to stare at Thales, who felt a little uneasy due to the attention. Then, the king spoke again. The best Exted ever had, he said, sighing. Although saying this is a little unfair to Nicholas. Lord Merk, who was standing few feet away, nodded. He also cast a warning glance at Alex, who was left aside and seemed like she was about to throw a tantrum again. King Nuven murmured, Caslin. So, you met him, he mentioned me to you. Yeah, Thales flashed an awkward smile, nodding. Caslin said, you used to be a good king. Nuven VII was slightly startled. He then slapped his thigh and let out a hearty laugh. Ha 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 ha. Used to be. King Nuven caught the keywords instantly and continued to guffaw. Well said. Astonished, Thales shrugged helplessly. The king's laughter echoed throughout the hall. Merk lowered his head slightly. King Nuven suddenly stopped laughing. Sighing, he seemed to be reminiscing about the past. Tell me, what did that old fellow say about me? He snorted and asked. Thales watched King Nuven's facial expression closely. He said, you are only human. You will age, and will be driven by desire, rumors, and impulse someday. The smile faded from the king's face. His gaze flickered with hints of strange emotions. And Thales was beginning to feel on edge. Eventually, King Nuven gave a long sigh. I can't say he is wrong. Silence ensued. Now, Thales, why don't you serve our beautiful maiden a cup of wine? King Nuven said abruptly. He handed the goblet to Thales and nodded at Alex. Given your future relationship. Receiving the goblet, Thales was startled by his request. What is going on? Make the arrogant, pampered young mistress drink the rye wine. Lord Merk, who was watching this not too far away, was also puzzled. Huh, Alex turned white, frantic, she peeked at Thales. And then the metal wine goblet, shaking her head stubbornly. No, Grandpa, I don't want to. King Nuven stared at her quietly and coldly. Terrified by the old king's gaze, she lowered her voice. Nevertheless, the king's granddaughter refused to give up. Her frown faded when an idea dawned on her. She turned around and tugged at Little Rascal. She can. Let her drink on my behalf. She is my servant after all. Being dragged forward by her mistress, the unsuspecting Little Rascal panicked. The bespectacled girl glanced at King Nuven, then at Thales. She was close to tears. No. Thales squinted at them, bemused. Right at that moment, Merk spoke up. Lady Alex. The king's administrator stared at Alex sternly. His gaze was filled with wrath. Stop making a big fuss. Alex's voice faltered and she flinched timidly. It is an order from your grandfather, your king. Merk pulled Alex away from Little Rascal with a forceful tug. Obey him, whether it's about the wine or your marriage. Chastised by Merk and pressured by King Nuven's beseeching gaze, Alex stepped forward dolefully. She took the goblet from Thales with much reluctance. With her reddened eyes, she glared at him, and looked at King Nuven pitifully, but the latter appeared unfazed. Thales shrugged, implying there was nothing he could do. Being left with no choice, Alex pouted and downed the wheat wine angrily. Alex dropped the wine goblet with rage and shot Thales a sharp stare. A few seconds later, she started to cough due to the heavy taste of the alcohol. The king chuckled lightly. Merk, this reminds me of Soria's drinking habit, King Nuven said, laughing. I heard from Caslin that when he was in training with the White Blade Guards, he'd win every drinking game. Yes, Merk also laughed and nodded. Prince Soria was very easygoing, and he really could drink. Yes, I recall you have a close relationship. King Nuven looked up at Merk with much nostalgia. We knew each other since a long time ago, all the way back when you let him train with the White Blade Guards under a fake identity. Merk had somewhat of a half-smile as he nodded. He wasn't just the prince. He was my fellow comrade and friend. I still remember his hearty laugh. King Nuven's lips curved. Ignoring the glare Alex aimed at him, Thales watched the king and his vassal as they reminisced about the former crown prince, Soria Walton, thinking whether he should leave. Yes, he likes to laugh like that, like me. It's such a shame that he went and got himself a sulky wife. King Nuven sighed. I remember every time they dined with me, they never took a proper look at each other. Lady Adele came from Vine City in the southwest region of Camus, where the climate was warm and humid. Moreover, she was the daughter of a marquis and she never got used to the arduous Northlandic life. Lord Merk glanced at Alex and heaved a sigh. Lady Alex obviously inherited much of her mother's personality traits. Alex pouted once again. King Nuven snorted lightly. Thales. King Nuven cast the Prince of Constellation an icy look as the latter was about to excuse himself. I told you that my eldest son's death was not an accident, but an assassination. Merk seemed slightly startled. Soria. He peeked at Thales, then at King Nuven. He hesitated to speak. The next thing that came out of the old king's mouth threw him off balance. "Tell him, Merc," King Nuven said coldly. "How did my son, Soria, die?" Thales held his breath. He took a peek at Merc, his mind laden with questions. Something isn't right. The eldest prince, why mention an incident that happened so long ago? Besides, it was a hard topic. Did he bring this up on purpose? Alex seemed to know how serious this topic was. She quieted down and had a timid expression. "Your Majesty," Lord Merc voiced his objection with a grimace. "This topic is a little sensitive for Prince Thales' position." He was interrupted by King Nuven. "Tell him, he needs to know." The old king picked up his wine goblet from the floor with a cold look. "From the beginning to the end," he said. Merc gawked at King Nuven, whose expression became horrifyingly grim. Intimidated, Alex looked down and took a step back, bumping into Little Rascal. "Why?" Thales tried hard to subdue his tone of voice. "Your Majesty, you told me that the assassin was from Constellation, right?" Merc was startled. He was surprised by Thales' knowledge of this detail. King Nuven shot Merc a stern glare. Thales rolled his eyes, watching the awkward situation unfold. He secretly regretted not leaving sooner. The atmosphere's really taking a turn for the worse. The administrator sighed, and began, "It happened 12 years ago, shortly before the winter came." Thales was alarmed. 12 years ago? Wasn't it? Prince Soria brought Lady Adele and Lady Alex out of Dragon Cloud City for a hunting trip. Lady Alex wasn't even a year old yet. I was in charge of Prince Soria's safety even before that, so Nicholas assigned me to protect them with a small unit of white blade guards. Merc looked down. His voice was deep and filled with agony as he recalled the painful memory. But things went wrong nonetheless. Thales said nothing and listened closely. Coincidentally, Harold Lampod, the oldest son of the former Archduke of Black Sand region, was visiting Dragon Cloud City that day. He too was heading to the same place to hunt. Merc paused for a second before he continued. His voice began to shake. That assassin had infiltrated Harold's entourage. Thales narrowed his eyes. He hid under Lady Adele's wagon, waiting for Prince Soria to return after talking to Harold, and then... Merc clutched his fist and clenched his teeth as he exhaled. Sitting on the staircase, King Nuven remained silent. His gaze was numb and vacant. I shot out a signal arrow, requesting immediate aid. Thales could tell that what Merc had gone through that day devastated him. His face twitched and his eyes were closed. Nicholas stopped the assassin while he was getting away, but in the end, he managed to escape. Prince Soria was fatally wounded and he died of blood loss instantly. Lady Adele wanted to protect Lady Alex, and... Again, Lord Merc squeezed his eyes shut in anguish. I couldn't protect them. Alex lowered her head and stared at the ground blankly, while Little Rascal, who stood behind her, restrained her breath. Lord Merc eventually calmed down after a few seconds. He swallowed and began to speak woefully. Although there was no substantial evidence, according to Secret Room's investigation, we were certain that the assassin came from Constellation. It was apparently ordered by the royal court. Thales frowned. No way. The assassination 12 years ago. Wasn't it the bloody year in Constellation? His thoughts were interrupted when King Nuven looked up and spoke in a gloomy, heavy tone. Thales, 12 years ago. We sent troops down south to Constellation for a good reason. Ellipsis. Constellation, Eternal Star City, an unknown dungeon. Clink clunk. The shrill metallic sound of an opening gate echoed in the dark. 2 torches that had earlier been dipped in eternal oil were lit and 2 wardens walked down a gloomy corridor. The fire illuminated the surroundings and rows of prison cells with thick metal bars became visible. The noise and firelight caused a ruckus in the jailhouse. Bloody hell, don't you have a normal routine like other sane human beings? In one of the cells, a clean and well-groomed but plainly dressed man was awakened by the noise. He seemed to be an aristocrat. He lay in his bed, grumbling sleepily. It's probably midnight, or 1 in the morning. Back when I was in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The 2 wardens who held the torches ignored him as though they were used to it. They stepped aside, clearing the path for a robust figure in the middle. Your Majesty, King 80, you are here at last. Drawn by the firelight, a scruffy, delirious old man lunged forward. He held on to the metal bars and shook them. Please reconsider what I've said. Even if you don't think for yourself, what about Prince Midir? Do you want to pass down a failed nation to him? Instructed by the robust figure, the 2 wardens exchanged glances and began to lead the way. On both sides of the path, prisoners in the cells gradually woke up. Each reacted differently to their arrival, but most appeared deranged and shouted manically. You're all going to die, ha 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 ha. An old prisoner laying on his stomach roared in hysteria. Even the royal family, you're going to die as well, how dare you, ha ha. The 3 figures moved on, unbothered. Look who's our guest today. A young, well-built prisoner leaned against the bars, squinting at the firelight. He still appeared to have a sound mind. Well, isn't it our 5th prince, the royal family's disgrace? Why aren't you continuing to spread your weak seeds on top of some poor women? Why loiter here instead? It wasn't me, it really wasn't me. A prisoner buried his head in his arms, crying. I never touched Prince Herman's wine glass. No, it was Jenkins. He added the poison. Noverk, right, Noverk. This was a prisoner with his back facing the corridor. He was carving something onto the wall and mumbling non-stop to himself. I know what he's planning and he's doing it behind Duke John as well as Count Carabane's backs. Perhaps it's related to the rebel army. I've suspected him a long time ago, but that hateful woman, Sonia Caesar. The trio continued moving forward. Hey, boy, a convict with scars all over his face pounced on the prison bars once he saw their faces clearly. He roared, what happened to the western front lines? Have we retrieved Blade Fang's dune after you conquered the desert god's altar? What about the orcs? What about the 8 great tribes belonging to the subordinates of the dragon skeleton throne? Tell me, hurry up and tell me. The robust figure paid no attention to the voices on both sides and strode forward. The 2 calm wardens brought him to the next area. The interior of the prison cells in this place could not be seen as there were not prison bars. Instead, they were replaced by thick, locked iron doors that created sealed-off prison units. There was only one horizontal vent on each iron door, which acted as the only connection between the sealed-off prison units and the world outside. The 2 wardens brought the person to the innermost prison and one of them knocked on the iron door with great force. Bang, bang, bang. The other warden cast a glance at the robust guest, while the latter nodded his head slightly. Hence, the warden seized the iron bolt controlling the vent on the iron door and drew it open, revealing a small hole that could fit half of a person's face in it. The cell was dark and horrifically quiet. That silence lasted for a long time until a bold and unconstrained voice traveled out slowly and airily from the pitch-black cell. What a pleasant surprise. What could possibly bring the mighty Iron Hand King before a traitorous duke? The 2 wardens bowed slightly. Once they stuck the torches in the grooves of the wall behind them, they left in a respectful manner. Under the illumination of the light provided by the fire, a haggard face made to look incredibly shaggy by the beard on his face appeared behind the vent on the iron door. The prisoner in the cell was the current Duke of Northern Territory, the Iron Eagle, Val Arund. He was staring at the person beyond the door with a sharp gaze. Beyond the door was the Supreme King of Constellation, Kessel V. He sat down gently on the chair that had long since been prepared outside the cell. Without any expression on his face, Kessel spoke softly, I came here to talk to you about the past, regarding the Northern Territory's fall during the Bloody Year. Val's expression changed and he disappeared from the iron door. Immediately after, his depressed laughter traveled forth from the cell. As the light from the fire swayed, Kessel fell silent. He did not speak. Once the Duke of Northern Territory had his fair share of laughter, he spoke coldly, there's nothing to talk about. When the war was at its peak, I wasn't even in the Northern Territory. My father, brothers, wife, and my older sister were the ones fighting in that war. If you want to talk about it, go to Hell's River and talk to them. Kessel quietly stared into the darkness behind the vent, which did not allow him to see the end of the cell. He then exhaled softly. I want to tell you the true reason behind the war. Kessel V's voice was as strong and firm as ever, but there was a hint of sorrow as well as dejectedness added to it. It's about Extit's invasion. The person behind the iron door fell silent in an instant. What do you mean? Val's voice rose into the air slowly. The rebellion in the past was very bad. The entire Blade Edge Hill, half of South Coast Hill, along with Baron Bone Tribe and the orcs in Western Desert Hill as well as a third of Constellation's land burned in the flames of war, Kessel said calmly as if he was talking about something very normal. And after the counter-insurgency forces switched sides, we could not even mobilize an armed army. That is why your uncle was sent to enlist recruits into a new army. Val let out a cold harumph behind the iron door. Starlight Brigade. Kessel nodded, even though he knew that Val could not see him. Extit saw the change. Nuvan VII regularly contacted the Archdukes. The invasion of the Great Dragon to the north was practically set in stone. They decided on the date to mobilize their army, and in the beginning of spring of the coming year, they would head south to Constellation. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. However, the Duke of Northern Territory soon discovered that there was something off. Wait, you said the beginning of spring for the coming year. Val's tone changed. Impossible, Extit undoubtedly invaded us during winter that year. This time, the silence lasted for an especially long period of time. Kessel sighed deeply. The king spoke in his most somber voice. It came from the bottom of his throat, and his words were indistinct. That's right, that was their original plan. Due to an accident, they brought the date of the invasion forward. Val's face appeared behind the vent again. His expression was frosty. He fixed his stare on Kessel, who was beyond the cell. He realized what was off about this. What accident? The Duke of Northern Territory asked agitatedly. Why did the Extitions bring their schedule forward? King Kessel stared at the ground motionlessly. Answer me. Val gritted his teeth. Answer me, Kel. Kessel sucked in a deep breath before he lifted his head to stare at his former bosom buddy. When we received news from Northland, the entire palace was in fear. The rebel army, the Baron Bone Tribe, Extit, Constellation was powerless to face a battle from 3 sides, Kessel said slowly. Hence the palace proposed a plan. We wanted to push the date of Extit's invasion back. A chill that never appeared before in Val's heart rose in him. Push back? The Duke asked instinctively. Kessel nodded without any emotion on his face and said, we wanted to stir up the conflict between Dragon Cloud City and Black Sand region so that they would be busy with their own matters and would not be bothered to invade us. Bang. Val swiftly pounced forward. He grabbed the edges of the vent before he gritted his teeth and fixed his stare on Kessel. What did they do? Constellation sent assassins and dispatched all personnel. Their target were the 2 heirs in Dragon Cloud City and Black Sand region, Soria Walton and Harold Lampod. Kessel's voice became increasingly hoarse. It sounded as if some kind of force was devouring the strength in his robust body. That assassin should have shifted the blame of one of their deaths on the other, then create an eternally irreparable rift between Dragon Cloud City and Black Sand region. When he heard this, Val's breathing grew heavier. But an accident occurred. Due to some reason, that assassin was exposed, Kessel said slowly, and Soria, Nuven's eldest, died as well. Val turned around with his back facing the iron door. His expression could not be seen. Even though we didn't leave behind any proof, Nuven still knew that we were the ones who acted. Kessel closed his eyes. Worse still, it broke the illusion of power we created and exposed our true strength. It told them that we were powerless to fight against the soldiers from the north. You know what happened next. Kessel opened his eyes slowly, and his voice was filled with fatigue. Extit brought the date of their invasion forward and chose to attack during winter. They chose a date when it would be the worst possible time for restocking military supplies and deployed their troops to the south. Horace brought a handful of soldiers to meet with Nanchester and headed into Broken Dragon Fortress. On the 2nd day after his death, John conquered Zadra, the final territory of the rebel army. 10 days later, the fortress fell into enemy hands. The beginning of spring in the coming year, Extichans used the fortress as their base and like a tidal wave, flooded the northern territory. Another long period of silence. It lasted so long that the light from the fire started becoming dimmer. It lasted till the Duke of Northern Territory broke the silence. Ha 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 ha. Val started laughing in desolation. The assassination plan that was originally supposed to postpone Extit's invasion instigated and brought forward their plans instead. Ha 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 ha. Kessel did not speak, he only listened to the Duke's laughter quietly. The Duke finally stopped laughing. Who was it? He asked airily. Who was it? Val seized the iron door and gritted his teeth in sorrow. Who suggested this damn plan? Kessel stared at Val. He saw the expressions of grief, pain, anger, hatred, and shock mixed on his face. The king shook his head. Father was forced to. Starlight Brigade suffered straight losses at the start. John was forced back inch by inch from Jade City to the Land of Ivory, then to Walla Passage. The rebel army had even extended their roots deep into the underground world of Eternal Star City. No one thought that John would be able to turn the tides in such a short time and win so many battles. At that time, the entire palace was cast in the shadow of having the country fall. Kessel took a deep breath. That was why the assassination happened. Val's expression slowly froze, but his hands trembled non-stop as he seized the cell door. If that plan hadn't been around and that assassination didn't happen, the Duke of Northern Territory instinctively mumbled. Kessel pressed his hands on his knees and lowered his head slightly. Yes. His expression was slightly distorted. He controlled his neck to allow himself to nod while he was trembling slightly. If Extit had waited till the beginning of spring before they attacked, from what I can see now, John's Starlight Brigade could have absolutely, without a doubt, arrived in the north to provide your father and the fortress with support. Broken Dragon Fortress would not have fallen. And whether it be Cold Castle or, both would not have fallen. The Northern Territory would not have suffered such a tragedy either. Val slid down behind the iron door dejectedly. Thud. The muffled sound of knees crashing against the floor appeared from behind the iron door, along with the Duke of Northern Territory's oppressed, tormented growls. Are you saying, that all of you, all of those bastards in your father's imperial conference and that stupid plan of theirs, brought about the deaths of millions in the Northern Territory? Val asked with a hoarse voice. Ha, and we always thought that King Nuven had seized the opportune moment to launch the invasion and conquer the fortress, and in the end, ha. Kessel did not answer him. He only waited quietly. The brilliant light illuminated his side profile. There was only numbness in the depths of the King of Constellation's eyes. After some time. What about that foolish assassin? That idiot who exposed himself after he failed the assassination? Val's voice, which had changed slightly in pitch due to his grief and hopelessness, traveled from behind the iron door. There was deep hatred buried in his voice. Did you dig out his heart? Kessel V turned his head around and stared at a completely empty spot in space. It was as if a person was standing there. Silence. For a period of time, only Valorun's deep and depressed sobs could be heard in the air. Kessel's eyes were filled with complicated emotions that were difficult to understand. That's right. No one knew how much time had passed. The Supreme King of Constellation, Kessel Jadestar V, was just staring into thin air. With an emotion that was difficult for an average person to understand, he spoke slowly, that assassin is paying the price for that failed assassination, which brought about grave consequences. He is forever imprisoned behind a cursed mask and he will never see daylight ever again. The king stared at the spot that was void of any living person, and his voice was incomparably quiet. In endless loneliness and never-ending darkness, he will taste pain and suffer through eternal torment. He will serve his sentence with the remainder of his lowly life. For that devastating battle. And for the countless souls he owes. Chapter 158 Betrayal. The Hall of Heroes was filled with silence. You know, Thales, when Soria passed away. As he watched King Nuvan, Thales tried to calm himself down. Anger, madness, hatred, compelled me to spread the wrath of the Walton family in Dragon Cloud City. The old king stared blankly at Thales, as though he was staring through him at another world. Compared to that, the benefit of conquering constellations seemed less important. Thales did not respond. In fact, any kind reply seemed inappropriate now. King Nuvan looked up at Merc, who appeared devastated. Merc, why didn't you protect him? Why didn't you protect Soria? The king's expression darkened. You are a white blade guard. You should have been by his side, ensuring his safety. Merc lowered his head. The sadness on his face deepened. Alex seemed bothered by this topic. She peeked at the sorrowful King Nuvan, then at the despaired Merc. Her breaths quickened, while little rascal seemed relatively calm. Merc, the king's granddaughter pleaded softly, Not now, Lady Alex. Merc silenced her as he squeezed his eyes shut, panting heavily. Alex paled and flinched. She pursed her lips and her chest trembled. She abruptly clutched at little rascal's hand and the latter became terrified. I couldn't bring myself to talk about Prince Soria's demise. Lord Merc clenched his teeth miserably. Your Majesty, you pardon me for my mistake. Nicholas merely imprisoned me for a few days for the sake of the protocol. Nevertheless, for the past 12 years, the guilt. That sort of guilt torments me, at every single moment of every single day. King Nuvan stared at him wordlessly for a long while, then exhaled. Yes, the old king swirled the goblet in his hand. I had no reason to punish you. Instead, I entrusted everything to you and even promoted you to Imperial Administrator. Because I know, said King Nuvan gloomily with a grim expression, you were the person Soria trusted the most. He trusted you with his life and the safety of his family. The administrator trembled. He bowed down with his right fist on his chest and said, I shall devote the rest of my life to you, to Lady Alex, to the Walton family in Dragon Cloud City. Thales heaved a small sigh. At that moment, a dozen faces came to mind, from King Kessel, Queen Kia, Duke Arund, King Nuvan, Archduke Pofret, Count Gilbert, and Lord Merc, to Madame Gines, the Kingdom's Wrath, the Fortress Flower, the old veteran Gennard, Private Willow, and so on. What happened 12 years ago had changed the fate of many people, the destiny of Constellation and the Great Dragon, the lives of the nobles and commoners. King Nuvan sighed. Since his day in the White Blade Guards, you have been with Soria for many years, have you not? Merc. Alex tugged lightly at the corner of Merc's sleeve. Her lips quivered. I feel. Merc recomposed himself. He turned around to comfort Alex. Please be calm, Lady Alex, it will soon be. Alex gave a sudden jerk. Thales furrowed his brow. The next thing he knew, the girl's eyes rolled back and she collapsed. Thump. Terrified, little rascal let out a scream. Merc paled. He kneeled down beside Alex and propped her up. Lady Alex, what's wrong? The girl merely stared vacantly at the ceiling. Her limbs swung back and forth and her torso spasmed violently. Thales hopped down from the staircase, watching her in astonishment. What just happened? Does this girl have some kind of medical condition? Is it epilepsy? Little rascal could not stop shaking. Panic-stricken, Merc held Alex in his arms. He looked up at his king and frantically said, Your Majesty. Lady Alex is, we need to get her too. Yes, but King Nuvan seemed to be immersed in his past. His gaze was unfocused and, as if he did not hear what Merc said, he continued, I remember you were best friends, as close as brothers. You went everywhere he went, to the battlefield, or to banquets. Your Majesty. Seeing Alex's worsened condition, Merc raised his voice with dread. Alex's face had blanched into a lifeless shade. She opened her eyes and stared at Merc, frightened. Her trembling arms stretched out and clawed at Merc's clothing, like a drowning person holding onto a straw. Thales gaped at them in disbelief and only managed to snap out of it after a few seconds. In the meantime, King Nuvan just stared into the distance with an empty gaze. Alex's mouth opened and closed. Cold sweat streamed down her cheeks. Her face was twisted in pain. She widened her mouth, gasping for air as though she was suffocating. What came out of her was a string of ominous wheezes. Ha! Hiss! Little rascal who watched from beside her covered her own mouth with both hands and could not help but move back. She was extremely terrified. No, Merc held Alex in his panic. She looked as if she was suffering great pain. His eyes wide with fear. Lady Alex. The administrator no longer expected any response from King Nuvan. He lifted the girl in his arms, turned around sharply and shouted at little rascal, don't just stand there. Summon the physician now. Badly shaken, little rascal instinctively turned around. However, Thales' reaction was faster. The prince dashed towards the exit of the hall, clenched his teeth and yelled as he ran. Help, somebody, we need a doctor. Don't bother, the toxin from the blue vine grass is potent and deadly. Words that were even colder and terrifying made Thales' pleas for help die in his mouth. You can see the effects in just a few minutes. 300-something years ago, the alluring archduke and the royal family in Constellation 12 years ago died from this poison. Thales felt a violent jolt. He stopped in his tracks and turned his head around with incredulity. Lord Merk lifted his head in fear, and with the most disbelieving gaze, he looked towards the stairs. Over there, King Nuven opened his ice-cold eyes. He stared at Merk and his convulsing granddaughter and, as if he was placing a callous curse on them, said darkly, "She is already dead." As though to prove the validity of his words, in the next instant, Alex threw her head back violently. Her neckbone nearly snapped in half. She widened her terror-filled eyes and stared at Merk, as if she did not know why this would happen. Then, gradually, Alex Walton, the sole heir of the Walton family, closed her eyes. Her body went limp and eventually stopped twitching. Her hand fell to her side and swayed in the air. Her head tilted to one side, facing Little Rascal. Seeing her mistress' face, Little Rascal shrieked and fell on her posterior. Thales instinctively took a step back, his breathing quickened. Why, it's impossible, how? Thales could not accept what was going on. He widened his eyes and fixed his gaze on Alex's body for a few seconds. He then averted his attention to the somber-faced King Nuven, particularly the ring he twiddled around his right pinky finger, the formidable triumph that once belonged to the Emperor of Poison, Kessel Carlos VI, and the wine goblet beside him. It was you. Thales panted heavily and glared at him in alarm. You poisoned her. HMPH, of course. King Nuven gave a muffled, dejected snort. And do not forget that you were the one who handed her the wine. Lord Merk jolted, then started trembling uncontrollably as he stared at the girl in his arms. Thales clenched his fist so tightly he almost heard his knuckle crack. Handed her the wine. He gnashed his teeth and shot King Nuven a death glare. A strange feeling bubbled in his chest. Bastard, he hissed at the king. However, the latter pursed his lips, completely unconcerned, and looked at Merk again. A few seconds later, a stone-faced Merk who seemed to be in a daze lifted his right hand and placed a finger below Alex's nose. Then, as if he had touched a scorching flame, Merk shuddered and withdrew his hand. Thump. With Alex's body in his arms, Merk fell on his knees. The administrator raised his head and shot the king a pleading stare. No, 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 Merk shook his head, looking down at the unmoving girl in his arms, his face contorted with grief. He raised his head in panic and fear and stared at the king, then at Alex, who looked as though she was in a deep slumber. Thales gawked at the dead girl. Meanwhile, Little Rascal, who sat beside Thales, was scared silly. She gazed at Alex's dead body and shuddered. Merk's face scrunched up in distress. I beg you, your majesty. He kneeled on the floor. His voice cracked as he spoke, accompanied by gasps and pauses, like that of an asthmatic patient. Tears trickled down his cheeks and fell on Alex's face. Why, he pleaded. Thales tightened his fists, lowered his head, and let out a swift exhale. Merk wailed as he bellowed at the king in agony, Why? Why? King Nuven, who was previously in a state of deep contemplation, looked quietly at Merk and spat. Burn Merk, are you not aware of that? Merk was startled. If it was not for Mariah's death, I would not have looked into the Walton family lineage again. King Nuven squeezed his eyes shut in dismay and continued, the high priestess of Bright Moon Temple would not have discovered that she was not of Walton blood. Merk's eyes widened as he stared at the king in puzzlement. Thales' jaw dropped, gaping at Merk and the dead girl. Not of Walton blood, does that mean the 600-year-old Walton bloodline? This has made me recall many things, King Nuven said coldly. Soria liked to hunt, but he never brought women along, not even his wife. Speak, the old king commanded, tell us what really happened in that assassination 12 years ago. Staggered, Merk tightened his arms around the girl, weeping. His tears continued to stream down his face. King Nuven lost all his patience. With a murderous grimace he roared like a lion. Speak. Horrified, Little Rascal recoiled timidly while Thales tried to assess the situation at hand. He exhaled, walked towards Little Rascal, and pulled her off the ground. She gripped Thales' arm, her only support, and her eyes watched the fierce confrontation unfold before them. Merk sobbed and his eyes brimmed with despair. He gazed at the girl in his arms, and let out a sound that sounded like weeping sounds. 12 years ago, Soria brought Lady Adele out of town, because... He muttered, wheezing in the manner of a dying person delivering his last words. Because, King Nuven peered at him. Because, Merk placed a hand on her hair and stroked it. Because Soria found out about. Found out about what? The king's voice was frosty. Conflicted, Merk's face twitched, as though he was tormented by his worst nightmare. He found out about us, about Adele and I. Thales gawked at the warrior with the butch cut. Little rascal jerked at Thales' arm, hid behind him, clenched her teeth, and watched the exchange between the king and his administrator with great disbelief. Yes, Merc cried. Alex, she was my daughter. Cling clang. King Nuven could no longer control himself. He flung the wine goblet away with immense fury. The metal goblet fell and rolled on the floor with a sharp clang that blended with the administrator's cries. Thales inhaled deeply, trying to process what he had just heard. Only Merc's sobs of despair and the king's heavy breathing were left in the hall. Ha ha hoo ha, a repressed, dejected laugh, laced with a hint of desolation, rolled out of King Nuven's throat. You, Soria's most loyal subordinate, best friend, and most trusted comrade. You repaid his trust with betrayal and deceit. The king's roar echoed in the hall. Merc, who was kneeling and crying on the floor, lifted his head all of a sudden. No, injured by such an accusation to his honor, he bellowed, I did not betray him. I didn't betray Soria. Thales watched him from afar. His face crumpled and his heart ached. Merc gazed at his dead daughter in his arms, sobbing. Prince Soria was a great companion. I would die for him, he growled. We were trained by Castellan to be the toughest warriors in the White Blade Guards. Once, when we were at the 38th Century ground, he crawled his way towards me with a fractured arm, just to block a fatal hammer strike for me. When my mother fell sick, and my sister came to the city to seek my help, it was he who hired a physician and saved my mother's life. When we were trapped by the enemy in the White Mountain, with my left shoulder and his right one pierced by the pointy ear's arrows, we complained about each other's luck, retreated with our backs pressed together, and waited for Dominic's backup. Merc said, chuckling as his tears crawled down his cheeks, I remember the day I went home from my wedding. That bastard, without informing me beforehand, Soria brought along our comrades from the White Blade Guards, with carts upon carts of rye wine and roasted meat, marched into my village with a black-based red dragon flag and a cloud dragon spear flag. The local counts and knights attended the ceremony. Our village chief's reaction was close to hysterical, even more so than when his son became an excise officer. My mother was thrilled. She felt as if her son had finally accomplished something. Soria, I always saw him as my dearest friend, comrade, my prince. He thundered, tearfully, I would never ever betray him. King Nuven stood up abruptly, fuming. Bullshit. Thales felt a jerk on his arm. It was little rascal, who had begun to shake again. All he could do was grasp her hand in a gesture of comfort. You had an affair with the wife of my son, the person you served, behind his back. King Nuven's eyes flared, he shouted with frenzied rage, and conceived a child with her. You have tainted the pride and blood of the Walton family. You think this is not a betrayal. You never saw him as your companion, the one man you should have served and protected with your life. Traitor. Merc, kneeling on the ground, heard the king's words. He stared at Alex in his arms, his daughter. Tears streamed down his face and roared in grief. Ah, no. He squeezed his eyes shut in anguish. Thales ground his teeth, scowling at the two of them. He felt a wave of melancholy wash over him. It's not like that, Adele, she was so kind, and gentle, so, Merc was on all fours, pounding the floor with his right fist. She should not have come to Dragon Cloud City, should not have met Soria. You mean she should have met you instead? King Nuven's words radiated an air of ferocity. A shameless traitor. Adele, it was a mistake. Merc's teeth chattered. He caressed the face of his dead daughter with a conflicted expression, as though he was looking at another person through her. Her relationship with me or Soria was a huge mistake. She shouldn't have left Camus, Vine City, and the greenery and the blue sky she loved. She belonged there. As for Soria, he was a great friend, a great warrior, but he never really cared about women. It didn't matter if she was a prostitute, a prisoner of war, a servant, or a noble woman. They were all the same to him, Merc cried, pressing his cheek against Alex's. In Soria's eyes, life was merely about booze and battles, politics and victory. He cared only about other warriors, his friends and enemies. During the night of their wedding, Soria was wasted. I was guarding the entrance of their bedchamber. The sound, it sounded just like rape, Adele's cries of resistance. I guess Soria saw the consummation of their marriage as a celebration after a battle. The next morning, Soria left for a hunting trip. I stayed behind to watch Adele. Her expression, it was not how a newly wedded wife was supposed to look like. Thales listened to Merc's painful confession with a grimace. One day, I caught Adele trying to slit her wrists with scissors. I told Soria about it, hoping he would treat his wife better, but Soria thought she had disgraced the Dragon Spear family. He picked up his whip, wanting to teach her a lesson. I was standing at their door at the time, clenching my fists, listening to Soria's roars and Adele's screams, feeling angrier than Soria, more miserable than Adele. Every time, it's always like this every time. Merc hugged Alex's dead body tightly. His eyes shut as tears cascaded down his cheeks like floodwater. Since then, Adele never stopped attempting suicide, and I stopped her more than once. I kept this a secret from Soria, because I didn't want him to hurt her again. Adele, she was like a blossom that was ravaged and abandoned. Soria's treatment of women was so much worse than the cruelest Northlander. When he was in the mood, he would force himself on her, When he was not, he cast her aside and did not even bother to look at her. Thales shut his eyes and heaved a heavy sigh. Adele, she was so lonely and so pitiable. Merc stroked his dead daughter's hair, his eyes filled with sorrow. She traveled all the way to Dragon Cloud City, but Soria did not appreciate her. Instead, he saw her as a puppet and a pawn, a part of his diplomatic bargaining with Camus. I was just looking out for her, trying to make her happy so that she would not try to kill herself again, Merc mumbled. Magic tricks, flowers, getting some Camion girls to keep her company, and at nightfall, getting Soria too drunk to even touch her. Adele was thankful for what I did for her. She did not attempt suicide again, and she even smiled quite often, although only in front of me. When my wife back at my hometown passed away, when I had no idea how to take care of the then 5-year-old Croche, it was Adele who helped me. From that point onwards, Soria's attitude towards her had changed for good. We began talking more often. She played with Croche in the room, I stood outside giggling like an idiot. She spoke to me from her room, I replied her from outside. King Nuven's expression remained grim. He said nothing. Eventually, the day we won the battle between the White Elves and the Alliance of Freedom, we returned to the city triumphant. Soria drank with us all night long, Merc said softly, sobbing. But I was preoccupied with thoughts of her that day, thoughts of Adele. Holding his daughter's body, Merc's eyes couldn't stop tearing up. His right fist tightened until his knuckles turned white. When they were all dead drunk, I headed to Adele's room, wanting to hear her voice. But my wound ripped open just then. Adele let me in to tend my injury. Thales' gaze darkened. A memory fragment surfaced from an unknown part of his mind. Oh, Mr. Straight A's is reading chick lit. What chick lit? This is a bestseller written by an American sociologist. The book title, weird, why are you reading this? What are you thinking, huh, hee hee. This, don't dwell on it too much. It's because a classmate of mine asked about it. No, wait, could it be, oh ha ho ho, why are you blushing? The weather is very hot. Ha ha ha, why are you touching your face? I was just messing with you. Ha 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 ha, you're hilarious. Let me share some of my vitality with you, ha ha ha. I can't stop laughing at you. Oh my, don't be mad. Come, explain this to me in layman terms. How am I going to dumb it down? Alright, this book mentions something interesting. In the Western realm, the concept of romantic love originated from illicit affairs. What the hell, affairs, how exciting. Here's an example. In the Arthurian legend, this is how the story of Lancelot and Guinevere began. The union between King Arthur and his queen is politically motivated. There is no affection in their marriage. The true romance lies in the forbidden relationship between a knight and his queen, that is the emotional, passionate, genuine love. Another example being, Don Quixote, the protagonist dreams to become a knight and romance the wife of the master he serves. This ideal also originated from the Middle Ages, particularly among the Crusaders. Alright already, you can shut up now. I still ship Saber and Berserker together. Shuru can get the FCK out of my face. Guinevere 1 can get the hell out, too. Yup, I'll have to watch it again. By the way, does that mean that we're having an affair now? We're in a modern society, you can't compare us with them, sister. The memory faded. Thales stared at Merc and gave a helpless sigh. Merc continued to weep on the floor. God knows I regret everything, but Adele. Shortly after Alex was born, Soria began to suspect us. Soon enough, he found out the truth. The administrator swept a strand of hair on his dead daughter's face aside. His voice cracked. I could see the pain and hesitation in his eyes. I wished he would just stab me to death. That night, Soria told me that he was willing to let me and Adele go. He would cover for us and handle the rest, Merc said, punching the ground in distress. King Nuven listened to him wordlessly. The next morning, Soria took us out of town to settle this matter once and for all. It was that fateful day, when the assassin. Thales sensed that little rascal had started to shiver behind him again. The first stab was not lethal. The assassin spotted Alex and stopped attacking. But Adele, Merc continued, shouting in pain. Adele didn't know Soria's initial plan. She thought His Highness was going to execute us, so when she saw him collapse, she took out her dagger. Hearing this, King Nuven went limp and flopped back down on the staircase. Merc's sobs echoed in the Hall of Heroes. Seeing how this confrontation, which was difficult to put into words, had turned out, Thales felt his heart grow cold. Translator's note. Saber, Berserker, Shuru, and Guinevere, they are all characters from the Fate Stay Night series. Saber, Berserker, and Guinevere are servants, and Shuru is the master to Saber. Saber in universe is King Arthur, Berserker is Lancelot, and Guinevere is still Guinevere. Chapter 159 The Fateful Night. When Prince Soria lay in a pool of his own blood, the look in his eyes, Merc rested his chin on his dead daughter's forehead, filled with despair. I know we had committed an unforgivable crime, I could have stopped her. Then why didn't you? King Nuven looked up, he gritted his teeth, and snapped at the weeping man, you just stood there and watched that woman murder Soria. Perhaps you were secretly hoping that Soria would disappear sooner. King Nuven nearly burst into a roar as he delivered his final line. You were hoping that the obstacle between you and that woman would disappear. The administrator shivered. He turned to King Nuven with a terrified look. At that moment, Thales genuinely understood the fear, sadness, and helplessness Merc felt. And the deepest despair and numbness, and the panic when his darkest thoughts were exposed. Merc's expression gradually changed. He lowered his head, his face twisted into a grimace. He punched on the floor by his side and roared with intense grief. No, the administrator panted violently. His expression kept changing. I was going to turn myself in. Merc gasped, his forehead almost touched the ground. But Adele threatened to cut her own throat with the dagger, crying, forcing me to take them out of there. She refused to stay in that place any longer. But I could not. I knew I could not. I am a Northlander. I was a White Blade guard. I was also Soria's friend and subordinate. Merc bawled. I couldn't. Forgive me, Adele. Merc was trembling. He hugged his head like a child and wept weakly on the floor. I couldn't. But you kept quiet and let Soria rot in your lies and deception. King Nuven had a numb expression. And you took his child, the bastard of you and that woman, back to my palace. Merc put down his hands and stared sorrowfully at his daughter, at her serene face. But, Alex, his voice quivered, as if his jaw was twitching. Alex knew nothing about this. She was innocent. Merc cupped his daughter's face in his hands with tears streaming down his face, gritted his teeth, and closed his eyes. Little rascal lowered her head fearfully, then she felt a shiver in Thales' hand. She raised her head fearfully and saw the Prince of Constellation purse his lips tightly, his eyes fixed on King Nuven. His stare was cold and filled with anger. What, do you feel wronged? King Nuven gave a wild laugh, full of mockery. Do you feel miserable? Do you feel as if your whole world has collapsed? Because I killed your daughter. Merc gasped, looking King Nuven in the eye. Thales took a deep breath. He quietly watched Merc's movements. Remember this feeling. King Nuven's voice was raspy and deep, harboring a spine-chilling tone. You deserve it. Merc held his daughter. He teeth clenched, his eyes red with tears and indignation. He growled in agony. King Nuven could not care less about the close distance between him and his mortal enemy. Coward, bastard, if you feel wronged, avenge her then. Merc's fists were clenched with a great force and made cracking sounds. Like a beast reaching its breaking point, his eyes were filled with a mixture of hatred, agony, despair and madness. Upon hearing those words, Thales furrowed his brow. He looked at the hall entrance. Where are the White Blade guards? Where is Nicholas? If Merc really goes berserk and kills the king, damn it. Merc stared at the king, his breathing grew heavier, and his fist shook. In spite of that, the king held his gaze fearlessly, as if the person that stood in front of him was not a strong former warrior of the White Blade guards, but a defenseless, shackled weakling. Come, kill your king. King Nuven's eyes sparkled with a complex emotion. He huffed and said slowly, just like how, many years ago, your incompetence, cowardice, disloyalty and weakness, killed Soria. At that moment, Merc's expression changed as if he was struck by lightning. His mouth opened slightly and his lips quivered, as if he was trying to say something. But Merc closed his mouth in the end. The color drained from his face, his body shook and collapsed back onto the floor again. He then began to sob quietly. Little rascal let out a scream. The king stopped talking. Thales tried hard to adjust his breathing and control his emotions. What occurred in the Hall of Heroes today had shocked him. And for a while, the hall held only Merc's irregular sobbing. After a long time, King Nuven let out a snort, one that Thales could not decipher the meaning for. Leave, the king said tiredly. Do not appear before me ever again. Merc raised his head numbly. Burn Merc, you shall continue to live like this, until the day you die. King Nuven looked up and his eyebrow twitched. Live in the torture of guilt, remorse, loneliness and pain forever. Never to be forgiven, never to find peace. This is the punishment you deserve, for Soria's sake. Merc started to chortle hysterically. He lowered his head to stare at his daughter, and wept again. Get out. The next second, King Nuven roared with rage. Take your sin with you, and get out. Little rascal trembled again. Without Thales' support, she would have collapsed on the floor. Merc stared blankly at King Nuven. A few seconds passed before he slowly stood up, carrying Alex's dead body. He turned around numbly. The child in your arms is a Walton family disgrace, a symbol of betrayal. The king glared fiercely at him. She shall not be buried, she cannot corrupt my land. If I ever find out that you buried her in any inch of Extachian soil, even if she only has her ashes left, I will send people to dig her out, and I will feed those ashes to the wild dogs. King Nuven finished his speech sternly. When Thales heard this cruel verdict, he sighed and frowned at King Nuven. Merc trembled violently with his daughter in his arms, but he nevertheless gritted his teeth, took one step after another, and struggled to move forward. Lady Alex, little rascal sniffled, wishing to follow him. Thales held her back. No, don't, Thales said softly. It's all over, for your mistress. Little rascal shivered, staring at Thales with a piteous, helpless gaze, while Thales only watched Merc's back quietly without moving. Nicholas appeared at the hall's entrance, watching Merc with a complex expression. However, Merc only gazed at his daughter with an ashen face, his head down, turning a blind eye on everything around him. Until Nicholas said, "I swear on my blood, my body, my sword, and my soul to." Merc raised his head abruptly, having recovered from his trance-like state. He stopped and stared at Nicholas, dumbfounded, listening to the Star Killer uttered remaining lines. "Ward off the enemies, win countless battles until we bleed out. Defend lives, fear no sacrifices until the end of humanity. Be guardians of the future, honor our beliefs until the sun and the moon grow dim. Leave a legacy of hope, cast the light of glory until the world falls into eternal slumber." Merc shut his eyes bitterly, tears streamed down his face. Nicholas finished reciting the oath with a strange gaze. He looked at Merc sadly. "So long, my sworn brother. Your story has ended in The Legend of the White Blade Guards." Merc took a deep breath and gave a tearful smile. He took a step forward and walked past his former superior officer. "Do not forget His Majesty's warning." Without turning around, Nicholas said to Merc, "If we find out that you dared to bury her in our country's soil." Merc chuckled sadly. In the next second, he held the girl's corpse and, as if he was not conscious of his surroundings, walked out of the Hall of Heroes with a dazed expression and an unfocused look in his eyes. Thales watched Merc's figure disappear at the doorstep. Then, the Prince of Constellation turned around, panting slightly, and asked the question he wanted to ask a while ago. "Why?" King Nuven looked up with a dark gaze. "Alex was just an oblivious little girl." Thales stepped away from Little Rascal, towards King Nuven, and said spitefully, "What happened to Soria and Adele? What do these things have to do with her? She did not even know anything." King Nuven snorted. "Send her away or lock her up, you had better alternatives." Thales tried to control his breathing. King Nuven chuckled coldly, his tone was sad and lifeless. "Ah, I noticed another characteristic of yours, an unnecessary sense of justice. Who taught you all these things?" "It has nothing to do with justice." Thales balled his fists. The bony, waxen figures of the shabby children in the abandoned houses emerged in his memory. She was just an innocent child. They didn't deserve that kind of fate. Every single day she lived was an affront to the Walton family, and she is also a threat to our alliance, King Nuven replied. "This is a necessary action, and the best choice I had." "You can find 1,000 excuses for your actions." Thales snorted. "Political purposes, benefits, secrecy, revenge, punishment, an act of impulse. You could even claim that you were forced to do it, that you had no choice. But none of that can justify and defend your deeds." Thales glared at King Nuven, gritted his teeth, and said, "You poisoned an innocent 12-year-old girl and ended her future, Nuven Walton, just to punish her father." A look of disgust appeared on Thales' face. "Are you pleased now that you have sought your revenge?" "Ha, sometimes you are more cunning than the most cunning nobleman." King Nuven snickered with a scornful expression. "Sometimes you are more naive than the dumbest fool." Thales ignored his ridicule. "I used to know someone who took it out on small children." The Prince of Constellation lowered his head and clenched his fists. He could not face his own failure and shame, so he took out his anger and hatred on blameless children. "You are no better than that coward." Thales panted, remembering the feeling of having his right hand skewered. "Do you want to know his ending?" King Nuven's gaze turned cold. The old king straightened his back and snorted coldly. "Do not forget, if it was not because of the girl's birth and the sins she hid behind her, then we would not have marched south, and you would not be standing here either." "Damn you, Nuven," Thales snapped. "We understand each other. Keep those senseless lies to yourself." Under those circumstances, regardless of the assassination or Prince Soria's death, Exted would invade Constellation. It was only the matter of time. "So you pity her?" King Nuven began to snigger. "I told you, you should get used to this way of life, little prince. Your enemies, too, would not hesitate to harm you just because you are an innocent 7-year-old. Thales gazed at him and suddenly burst into laughter. He shook his head. "Caslin might be wrong. It wasn't because you have changed, nor was it because you have aged," Thales said with sarcasm. "It is because that is who you really are. Soria, Mariah, Pofret, Merc, do you know why they all met with tragedy?" King Nuven's brow crinkled. "If the Walton family had been managing your country and treating your vassals and subordinates with these kind of methods," Thales said coldly, "you should not expect them to repay you with loyalty and integrity. Your sons, they died because of a father like you." Thales finished what he wanted to say. He looked at the king in front of him. Oddly enough, he was relieved. He felt no burden or had any form of conscience criticizing him for offending the common elected king of Exted. King Nuven stared at him and did not speak for a long time. The old king's expression grew stern. He glared at Thales with a complex emotion in his eyes. "You think this is cruel?" the king said softly. "You have not seen crueler things." Thales' brow creased slightly. King Nuven began with the solemnity of a king. "You, come to me." Thales took a deep breath. "Bloody old man, what is he up to this time?" He raised his head slowly, stared at King Nuven, and moved his foot forward. But he could not even manage to take the first step. It is not you. The king's gaze, sharp as blades, shot past the Prince of Constellation and landed coldly on a spot behind him. He then said coldly, I was talking about, that child. Thales was stunned, and his pupils shrank. He turned towards Little Rascal. Little Rascal, who was holding her breath all along, appeared to have an idea of what was about to happen. She shuddered. Little Rascal glanced at the king in disbelief, then looked at Thales with pleading eyes. She had never experienced a situation like this before and was so nervous that she nearly burst into tears. Do not make me say it a third time. King Nuven glared at her coldly. Little Rascal shivered, she did not even dare raise her head. However, driven by years of experience as a servant, she took a fearful step forward and tottered towards the king. Thales watched all of this in puzzlement. Little Rascal stood in front of King Nuven and stared at the ground, shuddering. Since the assassination of Soria, I have made sure that Alex was well protected, the old king said flatly. Most people do not even know her name, only that she exists. It's thanks to this that few people know of this secret and its truth. King Nuven's eyes were terrifying and his tone was firm. From the scullery to her bedroom, from the guards to her maids, every person who knew of Alex was eliminated while you were on your way here. There is just one left. Little Rascal trembled violently. Tears rolled out of her eyes. No, I did not see anything. I do not know anything. King Nuven lowered his head and raised his right hand, staring at the onyx ring with a profound gaze. Thales' breathing suddenly sped up. He had a feeling he knew what the old king might be up to. Thales strode towards King Nuven. Hey, you. But after 2 steps, Thales' shoulder was clutched from behind by a strong arm. A stab of pain erupted from his shoulder. Stay put. The star killer, Nicholas, was restraining him. Do not make a mess, little prince. Suddenly, half of Thales' body could not move. No, you saw what happened just now, with that secret, did you not? King Nuven said slowly to Little Rascal with his old, deep voice. You are also one of the very few people who know of Alex's existence. Little Rascal saw what happened to Thales, her face covered with tears. She turned to look at King Nuven's expression and shuddered with fear. I am begging you, your majesty, she cried. I will be obedient, I will stay in the castle, I will say nothing. King Nuven continued to stroke, triumph, on his finger. He smiled. No, damn it. Thales glanced at Nicholas hatefully, then turned his eyes back to King Nuven. In the next second, King Nuven smiled coldly as he held Little Rascal's hand tightly. Guess, what will be your fate? Nuven, Thales struggled violently, but in the grip of the leader of the White Blade Guards, his resistance was futile. With a cold look, King Nuven pulled Little Rascal's hand towards his right one. No. Little Rascal was nearly frightened to tears. No, no. Thales clenched his teeth tightly and drew JC's dagger from his waist. Then, with an incredibly bizarre angle, he swung it at the Star Killer. The 4th offensive style in the Northland military sword style. The ambushing style. Then, Thales widened his mouth in shock. He saw King Nuven extend his right hand to place the ring on Little Rascal's hand. Little Rascal stared at the onyx ring with the silver loop on her palm with a dumbfounded gaze. This is the authentication token that has been passed down through generations within the Walton family. Triumph, King Nuven said in a cold and steady voice. From now on, you are the last kin of the Waltons. You are the granddaughter of the common elected king of Exted and the Archduke of Dragon Cloud City, Nuven Walton's granddaughter. You are the only daughter of Prince Soria Walton and Adele Walton, daughter of Gestad, the Duke of Vine City. Thales and Little Rascal stared at King Nuven blankly. Saroma Alex Soria Walton, King Nuven said softly, that is your name. Little Rascal instinctively let out a light gasp. Her face was stark white. A few seconds later she finally realized the meaning behind King Nuven's words. The bespectacled girl lifted, triumph, with trembling hands and took a fearful step back. Nicholas let go of Thales, released the dagger that had previously been thrust at him, and let out a cold snort. However, Thales no longer had any time to be bothered by his attitude. Thales clambered up from the ground and stared at King Nuven in shock, then at Little Rascal, who was distracted and so scared that she was completely helpless. You must forget your past, be it your origin or the girl you served before. King Nuven continued on with his emotionless but powerful voice. You will listen to my commands and become a lady of the Walton family. You will marry that boy and become Jadastar family's support. You will protect the terms of the Walton family and the union between the two families. You will respect him, obey him, serve him, and as Saroma Walton, assist and support him. Little Rascal cast a glance at Thales while trembling, and her eyes behind her glasses were filled with tears. No. But King Nuven cut off her pleas for mercy. Remember your first middle name, Alex. It will forever remind you of your true identity. It will remind you of the night that changed your fate. But this is also a warning. A brilliant light shone in King Nuven's eyes. If you prove to be a threat to the interests of the Jadastar and Walton families, then that boy can reveal your identity anytime he wants. One single bloodline ceremony will be enough to destroy everything. Trust me, you will not like it. Little rascal was scared out of her wits. She was so afraid that she even forgot to breathe. When her strength began to wane, she sucked in a breath. King Nuven turned his head and stared at the Prince of Constellation with a profound expression on his face. And you, Thales, today, I have exposed the greatest secret and most terrifying past within my family to you. Triumph is just the first lock. This is the second lock. You can now, rest assured, take over the Walton family. Our alliance is still in effect. Thales shuddered. He looked towards Little Rascal. It does not matter whether it is out of benefit or out of that laughable sympathy of yours, you will protect her and her identity. King Nuven's voice suddenly became weary and hoarse. Just like how you will protect the Waltons. Little Rascal snapped out of her daze and stared at the ring on her palm before she started trembling. No, please, your majesty, almost in tears, Little Rascal said fearfully, I am terrified. I know nothing, I cannot. I did not ask for your opinion. King Nuven whipped his head around and glared at Little Rascal, causing the latter's words to die in her mouth. A fierce glare shone in the king's eyes. Do you understand? Little Rascal was so incredibly terrified that even her spectacles had become slanted. She could only nod rigidly. A faint smile appeared on King Nuven's lips. Thales stared at this scene with a blank gaze. A myriad of emotions raged in his heart. The old king sighed and said slowly, All right, Thales, you already know everything that you should know. King Nuven lifted his eyes and spoke in an incredibly exhausted voice. Return to your room. Thales gasped for breath and clenched his fists. He cast another glance at Little Rascal and saw the helpless and pitiful gaze in her eyes. Then he clenched his teeth, turned around, and left. Behind Thales, King Nuven spoke to Little Rascal in a low voice, and you, from tonight onwards, you will sleep in Alex's chamber. Thales gritted his teeth harder and harder with each passing moment. Little Rascal's terrified cries came from behind him. Anytime you find yourself fed up with this, think about today and your former mistress on your bed. Thales' breathing gradually quickened. He could already imagine Little Rascal's expression. Think about what happened to Alex. Think about her entire body spasming, and her pain-filled expression before she died. Thales shut his eyes gently. His footsteps became slower. Little Rascal's whimpers traveled into the air behind his back. Think about all the people who died because of this, then think about how fortunate you are. Thales came to a halt. He sucked in a deep breath. The servants and cooks have all been purged, but you should have new servants soon. It would be ideal for you to imitate her the best as you can. Enough. Under everyone's surprised gazes, the Prince of Constellation turned around and glared at King Nuven as well as the sobbing Little Rascal with rage in his eyes. Thales gritted his teeth and strode forward before he grabbed Little Rascal's wrist. Then, in a manner that did not allow anyone else to say anything about his actions, he pulled her to his side. He could feel Little Rascal's wrist, still quivering. Don't be so impatient, Thales. King Nuven dismissed Nicholas, who was about to move forward. Then he said languidly, you will have plenty of time in the future to slowly get acquainted with your fiancée. That is enough. Thales glared at King Nuven coldly. She will stay with me tonight. Once he finished saying this, he dragged Little Rascal and walked towards the hall with a grave expression on his face. Little Rascal pushed her glasses, which were about to fall off, and simply allowed Thales to drag her along, occasionally turning her head back to look at King Nuven in fear and alarm. King Nuven spoke flatly behind him, Thales, where do you intend to take my granddaughter? As long as she is not with you. As Thales continued walking forward, he replied brusquely, you bunch of lunatics. King Nuven's boisterous laughter came from behind him, but it only made Thales become even more agitated and his thoughts to be incredibly muddled. Thales Jadastar. Behind him was the king's loud laughter. This is your first night, be nice to your fiancé. Thales did not even turn his head back. He dragged Little Rascal out of the hall and did not even acknowledge the white blade guard's frowns. He only walked forward resolutely. He continued walking until Little Rascal spoke up quietly after she snapped out of her daze in her fear. Little Rascal pulled his shirt timidly. You are. I am Thales, Thales answered coldly. Is Lady Alex really? Little Rascal sniffed and asked, upset. Is she really? Yeah, Thales frowned and answered firmly, she's dead, poisoned. A violent shudder racked Little Rascal's body. Thales frowned. Poisoned. Little Rascal's gaze became unfocused and she began mumbling to herself in a neurotic state. Year 207 in the Empire calendar, Duke Sakarki poisoned his fourth knight with poison arrows. Year 489 in the Empire calendar, Count Kite Nander and Princess Leslie were both poisoned to death during their wedding. Year 721 in the Empire calendar, Emperor 80 III fell into a coma due to poison. Year 1171 in the Empire calendar, the Emperor of Poison, poisoned suzerain Radi Zadra on the negotiating table. Year 359 in the calendar of eradication, the alluring Archduke, Lysel Anlenzo died due to a cup of flower tea. Year 418 in the calendar of eradication. Count Lloyd Olsius was poisoned by the mourning Archduke. Year 660 in the calendar of eradication, due to blue vine grass. The royal family and constellation was. Enough. Thales shouted firmly and cut her murmurs off. Stop thinking about this. Only then did little rascal register what was going on. Thales dragged her and continued onwards. We should go back, little rascal said hesitantly. You cannot go back. Thales cut her off curtly and shook his head before he spoke. Based on what Nuven said, there are a pile of corpses there. It's definitely not suitable for you to stay in that place. Little rascal shuddered a little. Thales sighed in his head quietly as he continued walking onwards. Little rascal spoke hesitantly again. But I'm afraid that we'll. You don't have to be afraid. There are no bastards like Nuven here, Thales said quietly, but I can only protect you for a period of time. No, what I'm saying is, almost in tears, little rascal said softly, we're on the wrong path. Quote. Chapter 160 The Invitation. It was late at night in heroic spirit palace. Outside Thales' bedroom door, Thales was left speechless. Thales looked at the people before him in immense embarrassment. How old are you? How old? An urgent yet dissatisfied female voice sounded in front of him. Ida, his elf protector, looked at the restless Thales and the shy little rascal behind him. She grimaced sadly under her cloak. The first night of your arrival and you've already started bringing a girl to your bedroom. She's alone and very, Thales grumbled as though he was wronged. So she needs your company. Ida interrupted him with an unpleasant expression on her face. Ralph and Wya exchanged looks by her side. They also stared at Thales in a peculiar manner. Ida, listen to me, Thales instinctively had a feeling that things were about to progress badly. How old is she? Is she even 9? Ida yelled furiously. She raised her right fist out of habit and stuck out a single knuckle. Thales quivered. He raised both his hands as fast as possible, resolutely guarding his forehead. Pow! Thales braced his right forehead painfully. That's cheating. Ida's violent blow actually struck him from the side. Ralph as well as Wya exchanged another look and pretended as if they did not just witness the prince being violently attacked. Little rascal looked at the dizzy, groaning Thales with worry. Mindy's only touched a woman for the first time when he got married at 27. Even the most perverted playboy, Kira, waited until he was 13. The furious protector elf exclaimed. At your age, even the bed isn't enough for you. Thales smiled in embarrassment. That's a little exaggerated, sister. Ida wanted to continue her lecture, but she was stopped by Putre, who was behind her. I believe that His Highness has a reason for this, am I right? The vice diplomat of Constellation plainly said, all of you may return. I will communicate the rest of the matters to His Highness. After Putre repeatedly insisted, Ida left in an unyielding and furious mood. She still had an expression that said, you little bastard, when's she leaving? Ralph and Wya maintained their thought-provoking expressions. Thales breathed a sigh of relief as he sent little rascal into the bedroom. It seems like a lot of things have happened. Putre sighed as he watched Thales close the door. Thales' face darkened. It's like this, Thales scratched his head, that person, that's. The words of the second prince hung by his lips as he suddenly remembered little rascal's helpless eyes and Alex's pained expression. He met both ladies in the library, and each of them went through a fate that was unknown to all, whether it was fortunate or unfortunate for them. Thales' eyes became dark. No. The truth about little rascal's identity should not be revealed by me. In the end, the prince just sighed in his heart. He continued, that's Saroma Walton, King Nuven's granddaughter. Something occurred to Putre, and he said, I remember you telling me about meeting the king's granddaughter in the library before. Shouldn't her name be Alex Walton? Right, Alex. Thales slowly exhaled. That is her middle name. Since meeting the Black Prophet and frightening Ramon, he grew increasingly nimble at telling lies. His expression was calm, and his complexion unaltered. My relationship with her is not bad. Thales shrugged. So, she came to. Upon saying those words, Thales paused mid-sentence. He suddenly realized that it was 4 or 5 in the morning. To conceal previous matters, and craft an excuse for Walton's noblewoman to stay overnight in my bedroom, is so difficult. Under Putre's skeptical gaze, Thales revealed a smile uglier than one would look like when crying. She came, together with me. Whilst smiling, Thales stuttered miserably. Together. To discuss history lessons. As the words escaped his mouth, Thales had the urge to kill himself with a slap. In the face of Putre's skeptical expression, Thales smiled with a sobbing expression on his face. You know, we met in the library. Thales thought his face was about to go numb from smiling. He rubbed his hands together guiltily. She excelled in history. Putre gently raised his brow, his eyes filled with a peculiar, profound look. Thales thought it could be translated into, go on. Continue lying. Embarrassed and guilty, Thales looked at him. A few seconds passed before Putre sighed slowly. All right, about you taking the king's granddaughter into your bedroom in the middle of the night, and even getting the permission from King Nuven himself, I won't investigate further. Putre revealed a knowing smile. Thales' face twitched. He could barely squeeze out a smile as thanks for his understanding. Then, the relieved Thales began talking about King Nuven's proposal. Upon hearing the prince's narration, Poutre frowned deeply. If you put it that way, King Nuven has made up his mind on involving us in his schemes. So that we will help him succeed the Waltons' rule. Thales nodded unhappily. I will report it to the kingdom, Poutre muttered. From interests to standpoints, this matter involves too many. There is also Shadow Shield. If they murder any one of my members in the fortress, Thales recalled Pofret in the duel, feeling deeply worried. Even though I know that they will not let us go because of the bloody year, according to Pofret, could it be that they have an alternative goal? Or perhaps, they were entrusted by someone. Poutre's face grew dark. Each scene from 12 years ago resurfaced within his mind. It is indeed not that simple. Poutre finally shook his head in front of Thales. According to the words of that archduke, they wanted to kill you for entering Renaissance Palace. I'm afraid that it's not just a simple case of vengeance, or paying an assassin to kill you. Especially after the bloody year, Shadow Shield had suffered several heavy blows. They laid low especially in areas under the power of Constellation's king and his allies. Yet, they still did not give up and chose to murder Jadastar's final kin. Renaissance Palace, so again, it's matters relating to the throne. Thales scratched his head in frustration. Does this mean that we have to search for the mastermind behind those assassinations again? Poutre stared intently at Thales' expression. No, let your father and the secret intelligence worry about that. I just need to take good care of your safety. The vice diplomat of Constellation was adept at discerning people's thoughts. He revealed a reassuring smile. You've done enough tonight, and you've also done well enough. The risk of war between Constellation and Extit has been eliminated. The kingdom of Constellation is safe. Thales' heart skipped as he looked at Poutre. This is your doing. The latter nodded at him, his eyes full of motivation and approval. I do not say these words much. I held strong prejudices against you initially, but I've found you to be worthy of the title, Your Highness. Poutre had a complex yet sorrowful expression on his face as he slowly said, at this age, not every prince can go beyond his country's borders to prevent an unavoidable disaster for his country and citizens. Thales took a breath, and slowly lowered his head. Right. At least. The mission was accomplished. In spite of all the twists and turns in the process, there was still no great danger. Thank you, Poutre. The prince raised his head to reveal a smile, and he sincerely said, thank you, all of you. Without you, Ida, Ralph, and WYA, I'm afraid my trip would have ended in Constellation's birch forest. Furthermore, there was the arrival in Extit and the matters after arriving in Dragon Cloud City. Poutre laughed lightly. That is our responsibility. And you allowed for greater success of this mission. The ending was perfect. He calmly nodded and cast his eyebrows downwards. If Gilbert were here to see you, he would be very pleased. Back in the day, when the young Prince Midir went on diplomatic missions to the north, it was just as so. Thales curled his lips as he remembered the gentle, middle-aged Gilbert, the valiant Lady Gines, and habitually silent Yodel. On top of that, there was the little bits and pieces in Mindy's hall. Rest early. Poutre pointed at the door. If all goes well, we shall be able to return home in a few weeks. Thales nodded as he pushed the door open. Also, the first batch of messenger crows from Constellation arrived, Poutre smilingly said. One of it's written for you by Gilbert. I've placed it on the desk. Thales' heart skipped a beat. Thank you. Having experienced the ups and downs in the Hall of Heroes, his heart felt much more at ease now. He smiled. A letter from the cunning fox of Constellation, I can't wait. Poutre shrugged and raised his brow. One more thing. Thales turned around curiously. Poutre hesitantly said, you know, your father was very outstanding when he was young, say sensible and also early too. Thales squinted and expressed doubt. Poutre hung his mouth open. He looked at Thales, and then at the door. Eventually, he still expressed some concern and whispered, but you are indeed too young, your body has not matured. Thales' smile froze. Poutre winked awkwardly, maybe you should wait a few years. What he got in return was a powerful slam of the door from Thales. Ellipsis. Don't be scared. Thales looked at Little Rascal, who was still feeling all panicky. A sense of sympathy surfaced from his heart. They can't hurt you here. Little Rascal seemed to be hugging her knees nonchalantly. She had shrunk to the floor and sat by the bed, leaning against it without saying a word. Her eyes were locked on the floor, while both her hands clutched at that rough, unrefined skirt of hers. This helpless scene provoked memories of Thales' own past in abandoned house, along with those unfortunate child beggars. He could not help but sigh. I have to be Miss Walton now, right? Little Rascal noticed his arrival. She felt extremely distraught, and said, it feels just like a dream. Yes, perhaps, Thales whispered. Nobody can change King Nuven's will. Little Rascal trembled. Her eyes became red as she helplessly put her arm around her shoulders. In that instance, Thales just felt deep sorrow. This girl was swept into their dangerous games by the waves of her destiny. He hesitated and said, but, it's not necessarily a bad thing. However, Little Rascal simply kept her head down and began muttering to herself. Year 1090 of the Empire calendar. Tartarus, Duke Ferret's successor of Mingus province was suspected of coming from an improper lineage. The empire's magistrate burned him to death at Capital of Triumph, year 552 of the calendar of eradication. Grenfell, Camus Marquis of Libra City, was found to be an impostor. He was hung in the center of the city's central plaza, 4 carriages. Thales' skin started to crawl as he heard her words. "Stop," he exclaimed, "now is not the time for you to exhibit your ability to remember." Little Rascal held her tongue, and stared at him pitifully. She looked like she was on the verge of tears. "Do you want to know a secret?" Thales sighed. "A secret nobody knows." Little Rascal's expression slowly changed. She blinked and looked at him in surprise. "You won't see this in any book, the secret history of the Prince of Constellation." Thales sat down in front of her and shrugged. Little Rascal's eyes lit up as she adjusted her glasses and nodded. The memory Thales recalled was from more than a month ago. He chuckled as he said, "You know, when I first became a prince, I was just like you, on edge all the time." "Became a prince?" Little Rascal curiously asked. "Weren't you born a prince?" Thales hesitated, but said, "No, I was born a wandering illegitimate child, until I was recovered and brought to the palace." Little Rascal revealed an expression of sudden realization. "When they took me back, I wasn't used to anything." Thales smiled helplessly. "The sensation of chewing food in my mouth was strange, because I was used to eating burned bread. In the winter, that stuff was so hard you could use it to kill." Thales twitched his eyebrows. "Also, I had a taste of flavored liquid for the first time, except, it had a little smell to it. Do you know how smelly water is like?" Little Rascal let out a burst of laughter. "The clothes on me were too smooth, too soft. I felt like I was constantly naked, so I made 3 more holes on my belt. Although it was painful to walk, I still felt safer and more secure. Oh, right, I didn't even know how to wear the pants on my first night there." Thales reminisced his ridiculous history. He could not help but shake his head and sigh. Little Rascal was enthralled. She gradually forgot about the tear stains on her face. "I've never walked on such a flat and smooth black stone floor. In the past, if it wasn't a mud road, it was a dirt or brick road. When I saw that the library was actually paved with wood, it was practically torture to sleep on such a soft bed every night. It was suffocating to be covered by a quilt, so I would go down to the floor and hide in a corner. I'd sleep like that, just covered in my clothes." Thales shook his head. Little Rascal looked at him sympathetically, blinking and nodding. "But I still couldn't sleep with any peace of mind. Instead, I only slept better when we were camping in the wild during a diplomatic mission to Extit. Gilbert was very strict and the academic program was also intense. He wanted me to write 200 words a day. On the 20th day, he actually forced me to compose a poem using the ancient empire language. When I first took the carriage, I had to cling on the handles on both sides so that I wouldn't fall down." As he spoke, Thales himself was captivated. Little Rascal listened to him very intently as well, and she echoed him once in a while. When he spoke about being thrown off the same colt 58 times, Thales suddenly realized something. Little Rascal had already fallen asleep against the bed, and her head was slanted towards her right shoulder. With her glasses laid askew, she had her head rested on the soft bedside. Her small hands were folded atop her chest and supported by her bent knees. Her entire body moved up and down as she breathed. The little girl's platinum long hair fell softly with a few strands dropping into her mouth. So, the girl in deep sleep had to smack her mouth from time to time. Thales gazed at her sleeping face, and a smile surfaced on his face as he shook his head. He carefully swept her hair aside and pulled out the few strands of hair from her mouth. He then pulled up a corner of the quilt and blanketed Little Rascal's body. Thales stood up and lightly sighed. Hopefully, she can have one last peaceful slumber before becoming an official Walton. At the thought of that, Thales turned around desolately. He arrived at the desk. After expending much effort, he got into the chair and picked Gilbert's letter up. Thales looked at the familiar handwriting on the letter, shook his head in nostalgia and unfolded the paper. It was a short letter. "Your respected Highness. I hope you have arrived safely in Dragon Cloud City. We learned of your unfortunate encounter on the road. Lady Gimes is very worried about your safety. She repeatedly urged me to inquire about your health. Also, allow me to express my concerns to you. His Majesty has notified the suzerains of Northland and Central Territory along the way. He also sent a diplomatic note to the 2 commanders of Broken Dragon Fortress. They will send patrols and troops to ensure that the Birch Tree Forest is safe when you return. News and matters related to the Blood Mystic have been completely transferred to the Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department. Lord Morot personally assured me that they will handle it properly. In the name of the Kingdom, His Majesty has officially sent an overseas letter to the Night Kingdom. So far, we have not received a reply from the Night Queen. In addition, after a deep conversation with His Majesty, Duke Zion Covendier has generously donated a high-yielding crystal drop mine, increased the lifetime shares for transportation to the Central Territory, agreed to hand jurisdiction rights of the 3 southern barons over to the Kingdom, His Majesty kept telling me to inform you that all of this arose because of your hard work, Your Highness." As he read this, Thales curled his lips. His Majesty has already commended Baron Naraka Merc and Lady Sonia Caesar, increased the number of troops to Broken Dragon Fortress, urged the Northern Territory noblemen to take action, and ordered the two commanders to give Black Sand region the pressure they deserve. This is to express our solidarity to you and protest Archduke Lampard's dishonorable acts. Allow me to once again express my concerns about your encounter outside the fortress and also my pleasure as well as happiness upon learning that you are safe and sound. In spite of this, I fully understand your difficulties after entering Extit, Your Highness. The true test and obstacles are just about to begin. In this regard, I must take the role of the former Foreign Affairs Minister to remind you of the three most important points. Firstly, there is a large difference between Extit's political system and ours. Apart from King Nuven's identity as ruler, he also holds the identity of Archduke of Dragon Cloud City and master of the Walton family. The interests of Extit and the Waltons are very different to him, please pay special attention to this. Secondly, despite the strength and abundance of the military forces belonging to Extit's archdukes, there are complex relationship ties between them. From actual interest to historical ties, their entanglement is unclear. The division is even more apparent in the territories of Constellation, but I believe this is something you can use to your advantage. For example, the three southern archdukes have absolutely distinctive interests when it comes to Constellation and Dragon Cloud City. Their attitudes and interests do not agree with Constellation and Dragon Cloud City. In this aspect, you can always consult Poutre Nimane. Thirdly, no matter what predicament you encounter, please always believe that you are the sole successor of Constellation's throne, and you are also Tormund's descendant. You are considered the imperial family's descendant. Henceforth, do not worry about your safety. At the same time, please believe that King Nuven's current position of interest is similar to ours. Whether it is prestige or strength, no one else can compare to his in Northland. Therefore, the best strategy is to win him over, get his help, and direct his hatred towards Lampard. To quell the scourge of war, you may turn the conflict between Constellation and the Dragon into a contradiction between Extit's king and its archdukes. That is my suggestion. The above are just some of my realizations for your reference. My purpose is to ease your strategic discussions with Poutre, but I know that true politics and diplomacy swings between plans as well as mishaps. Hence, seize the essence of things and adapt accordingly. That is truly the brilliant way, just like how you performed in the Hall of Stars. I have much confidence in you. One more thing, when you asked me to send someone to Sunset Pub at Lower City District's Black Street, I found that the boss has been replaced. The female bartender and the few children you spoke of were nowhere to be seen. I suspect that they have fled to avoid disaster. To know the specifics, we may want to seek assistance from the Secret Intelligence Department. After all, it is not ideal for us to blatantly investigate in Lower City District in the name of the royal family. It will allow many people to guess your past, nonetheless it will not do your friends good. Please do not worry, our people have received information of a girl very similar to the female bartender you spoke of. Not long ago, she visited the Western City Police Station. I believe that we will find them soon. While you are in Extit, please do not fall back on your homework. When you return, I would like to test you on your sonnets. In addition, Lady Gines expressed that you should continue your sword practice. Do not slack, she wants to train you with real swords when you return. Thales grudgingly sighed. As the royal family's protector, Miss Ida's loyalty and strength are unquestionable. But she is not perfect and there are still certain aspects in her that are not adequate. Upon reading this, Thales could not help but roll his eyes and admire Gilbert's tact. Hopefully, you can take care of yourself as the other followers make up for their deficiencies. Allow me to once again express my care and concern. I hope everything will go smoothly after this. His Majesty is very concerned about your safety and the smoothness of your journey. In the days of your departure, he has missed you dearly. Thales was sure that this sentence was later added by Gilbert. Your loyal friend and aide, Gilbert Casso. Year 672 of the calendar of eradication, December 27th, Eternal Star City. P.S. Yodel seemingly entrusted me to send his regards to you, but hopefully I did not misunderstand his intention. Thales put the letter down. The image of Gilbert holding his cane surfaced before his eyes. His respectful bow and lively manner when he instructed brought a wide smile to Thales' face. He reread Gilbert's 3 recommendations on Extit and lightly shook his head. Gilbert probably did not know that they had completed the task on the first day of their arrival in Dragon Cloud City. At the same time, Thales could not help but be worried about the disappearance of those in Sunset Pub, Jala, Cindy, Ryan, and Korea. However, Gilbert had mentioned that Jala had appeared before, and since Jala was safe, then the child beggars should be fine. Besides, the Brotherhood had gone through the great incident that was the battle in Red Street Market. They should not have the energy to be bothered about a few child beggars. He exhaled and remembered his past as a child beggar as well as his family in the 6th house. He was filled with sentiment. Fate was not fixed, was it not the case? It was just like Little Rascal, who was deep in sleep behind him at that moment. When he thought about this, Thales could not help but stretch and let out a satisfied moan. Excluding all those weird events, this trip to Exted actually went on pretty smoothly. Little rascal mumbled and muttered to herself in her dreams behind him. His remaining days in Exted should be much more relaxing. With this in mind, Thales happily rolled up the piece of paper. At that moment, Thales was momentarily stunned. He discovered that there was another letter at the spot where the paper was originally placed. Perhaps his attention had been attracted by Gilbert's letter just now, which was why he did not notice this letter. No, Thales picked up that thin, deep blue, double-layered, hard piece of paper, and frowned. This isn't a letter. This is an invitation. Strange. Thales stared at the blue invitation in bemusement and scratched his head. Written on the cover of the invitation were 4 words, "To my dear friend." It was written in classic cursive handwriting, and he could not help but remember the agreement between Tormund and Raikaru placed in Raikaru's library. The cursive writing on it, excluding Tormund and Raikaru's, was similarly beautiful to this. Thales frowned slightly. He stared at the strange invitation and was a little hesitant. However, he had even lived through the ordeal this night. What else should he be afraid of? Thales shook his head while laughing at himself and opened the invitation without hesitation. Another line of the lingua franca written in beautiful cursive entered his vision. Dear Thales. It has been a long while since we last met. I miss you dearly. It is especially so when I searched for you through much difficulty. After I learned that you managed to restore your identity, besides having my heart ache while missing you, I was also happy for you. I hope that you have learned enough, educated yourself well, expanded your horizons, and obtained extensive knowledge during the time you are a prince. After all, it does not matter whether it is Jadastar or Carlos, both are great names. Our last meeting was in too much of a hurry and was also too short, so much so that I could not tell you plenty of the things I wanted to. There are simply no words that can describe my regrets. This also made me think of our mutual friend, the nimble and masked friend of ours. I am very happy that he did not accompany you with your trip to the Northern Territory. It is the only reason why I could send you this invitation. Of course, I miss him dearly as well. As I write these words, I become very eager to meet you. At this moment, forgive my rudeness and allow me to extend my invitation to you for our next meeting. You may choose the location. As for the time, why don't we set it as 15 minutes after you open the invitation? I hope that you will be happy. I look forward to our meeting, which is about to arrive very soon. Your loyal, sincere, old friend whom you were acquainted with in Red Street Market. Asda Sakern. Written just now. P.S. With reference to your complaint in Red Street Market, I have specifically prepared the invitation this time. I use the star blue color that complements your family as the cover design. I hope you will find it to your liking.